Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching third and final part of What If Kakashi merged with his younger self. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Stealth had lost all its purpose. Kakashi only muffled his footsteps out of habit, but he and Kabuto were still visible as he moved across the cavern's width, blade left behind. Kabuto did not move, but his smile remained fixed as Kakashi drew nearer. Close enough to see the fluttering beat of Kabuto's heart in his throat, he stopped just inches from the thin boy. The smell of excitement and fear overpowered almost everything else, save for the coppery tang of Raida's blood. Kabuto licked his cracked lips and declared, "As a demonstration of my capabilities, I am willing to heal your own injuries. I understand your hesitations, of course. But these are the terms of my services." Obito's eye was closed by Kakashi. Kabuto's eyes glistened, buoyed by the Sharingan's absence. "I even came with a modified biosynthetic prosthetic suited to match your own. You need only to give up this one thing, in order to save your teammates." Kakashi's head cocked. "Will you let them die just for the sake of your reputation? Who do you work for?" The only thing Kabuto did under Kakashi's stony gaze was smile slowly and without hesitation. "Every second you waste, the more difficult it will be to render care," he said softly. "Decide quickly, Hitaki Kakashi. And if I decide to keep it..." Despite the foul stench of fear seeping from his pores, Kabuto looked back with courage. "Then the lives of your comrades rest upon your shoulders," he said as quietly as possible. With a sigh, Kakashi rocked back on his heels. He looked down at his feet without seeing anything. "All right," he said. "All right," he repeated, his fists clenched tightly. "I'll do it." A beatific smile appeared on Kabuto's face as he straightened up and raised his hands to clap. He moved forward, arms outstretched as though to embrace Kakashi, saying, "Great decision, Hitaki-san. My master will be very pleased with your cooperation." With a growl, Kakashi moved. He punched straight through Kabuto's enticingly exposed torso, causing blood and fat to evaporate into a fine mist as raw chakra exploded from his right fist. Even his soft, wet organs exploded under the force of his blow. His hand immediately cauterized the blood flow by tearing through layers of muscle like wet tissue paper. Pink. Cheeked and still round with baby fat, Kabuto's youthful face gazed up at Kakashi with uncertainty. A strange contrast to the gentle patter of rain outside was the unsteady drip of chunks of flesh from Kakashi's clenched fist as it came out from Kabuto's back and onto the floor. But the profile, Kabuto uttered without emotion, as though the blow's agony had not yet fully hit him. The profile said, "That the odds of you accepting were very high." Kakashi smiled grimly at him. He drew back his fist and said, "The profile was wrong," in a lethal tone. With a gasp, Kabuto's legs abruptly gave way beneath him, as though the cords governing his limbs had been severed. His glasses skittered on the ground like a panicked spider as the back of his head snapped back to hit hard rock with a harsh crack. "No." Kabuto exhaled sharply as one hand frantically reached for the lenses. The other, glowing a pale grass green beneath the gory layer of blood, gripped at the jagged hole in his stomach. Kakashi stepped on Kabuto's wrist and felt the bone snap. "None of that," he said softly. The fingers curled into claws as they froze into a mockery of a human hand. As he watched Kabuto's face turn winter pale, he ground the glasses into a fine dust beneath his heel. "You won't be needing those anymore." Kakashi crouched and used his left hand to extract a kunai from a thigh holster. His right hand, its skin crisped and still dripping blood, hung uselessly by his side. Using the blade, he carefully and economically angled Kabuto's glowing green hand away from his body and pinned it to the ground, burying the kunai in his palm and burying it to the hilt. Kabuto muttered, "They will die because of you," in a voice that was rough from pain. "You will live with your Sharingan and with their lives forever hanging over your shoulders." "You're right, that would have worked on me," Kakashi remarked, glancing down at Kabuto's expression. Without the glasses, it appeared even more youthful, with round, dark eyes that were filled with fear. "But you see, I'm not the same person I was a few months ago," Kakashi remarked as he produced another kunai. "I know who you are, Kabuto." The black of the boy's eyes stood out against his pale skin as his face whitened even more. Kakashi leaned in and pressed his blade's razor sharp edge against Kabuto's throat, saying, "And I mean to eke out every ounce of pain I can from you, for deeds past, present, and future." Before dripping into the hollow of his collarbone, a thin line of blood trembled and welled up. Kakashi leaned close enough to whisper in order to be heard. "Tell me who you work for," he said. The flesh stretched taut between the sharp edges as the kunai slid down, scraping Kabuto's skin before striking the bone of his broken ribs. "I'll know when you lie." Kabuto smiled sickly at him. "You can try." Kakashi was instantly blinded by the serpentine arms of shadows that encircled his eye. With a growl, he scurried forward, instinctively squeezing his hands tightly around Kabuto's throat. "What did you do?" He threw himself into the darkness and lost all knowledge. Shodai's saggy balls, "I'm getting too fucking old to be doing this at my age." A hot gust of air passed over Kakashi's face. Through the blood-stained mess of his mask, he could smell ink, old pipe smoke, and the faint traces of last night's curry. And beneath it all was a very familiar smell that shone like a beacon in his fog-filled mind. Cotton whispered softly as a body sat down beside him, radiating heat. "I promised the kid bodies and I got him bodies," the voice continued. "Intact mind is another thing entirely." Kakashi saw the fingertip hovering inches from his mask as his eyes snapped open. Jiraiya growled as he carefully freed his hand from Kakashi's trembling hold. "Oh ho, guess who decided to join the land of the living," he said. "You know who you are?" "You're dead," Kakashi uttered without emotion. Jiraiya slapped his thigh and scratched his head, saying, "Ah, damn it, I really did scramble your brain." When Jiraiya attempted to assist him, Kakashi flinched away as he struggled to sit up. His wide eyes absently scanned the damp tile floor on which he lay, which was speckled with hundreds of seal characters that made their way around the room in a circuitous fashion. He hunched over and wheezed as the effort took the wind out of his chest. Jiraiya said, "Easy there, kiddo," as he rose from his crouched position and hovered over Kakashi's head in concern. "Didn't bring you back just to have you expire in front of me." Gazing down at his trembling hands, Kakashi examined the worn metal back of his Anbu issue gloves. His finger lines flaked with old blood, and his nail beds were covered in mud and grime. Wondering, "You're not dead," he said. "Right in one." Kakashi looked up at Jiraiya's worn-out face as a heavy hand rested on his shoulder. 10 years later, the Toad Sage appeared much the same as when Kakashi last saw him, albeit with fewer lines than he remembered. Yes, Jiraiya was alive in the past, and Kakashi was in the past. After taking a deep breath, Kakashi put his hand in Jiraiya's. He said, "It's good to see you," in a raspy voice. Jiraiya inquired, somewhat perplexed, "Has it really been that long since we last saw each other? I thought we bumped into each other at the old man's office a couple of months ago, during one of the festivals. The one honoring the new shrine consecrated in the village grounds." Kakashi shrugged his shoulders. Maybe his former self would have remembered, but the last time Kakashi saw the man was at his own funeral, his official portrait draped with black ribbons, his face lined and grim. "But first, a couple of questions to make sure I didn't knock your head too badly around during the summoning. Who am I? What is the last thing you remember and what is the last date you can recall?" Jiraiya. "Sama," interrogating Kabuto and the 15th of the harvest moon, Kakashi suddenly jerked out. "Ah, so that's the mysterious gray-haired fellow we found," Jiraiya remarked intently as he leaned back on his heels. "Not exactly part of the summoning ritual, so it was a surprise when he popped in with the rest of you." Kakashi coolly admired the strength and clarity that each stroke of chakra-infused ink brought as he traced the curve of a seal character by his knee. As brilliant as ever, Jiraiya's work bore a striking resemblance to Minato Sensei's earlier creations. Being surrounded by such familiarity was reassuring. The curves of a summoning contract, magnified 100 times, and modified to accommodate subjects in the physical plane, rather than astral, are the characters for space. Time, stabilized by the horse and crescent construct. Kakashi said slowly, "You summoned us across half a country," as a feeling of wonder grew inside his chest. "Maybe more. Are we in grass?" "Clever boy," Jiraiya remarked affectionately. "But how did—" "Timing, as you know," Jiraiya told him, his eyes glistening wildly, "is everything. Imagine my surprise when I popped by the outpost, cooling my heels with a spot of tea, when a half-crazed Anbu drenched in sweat and dead on his feet from chakra exhaustion hurtles into the building, demanding a battalion of troops as reinforcements for a stranded Anbu team in Earth Country." Kakashi said, "He made it," then, with a sudden sense of relief in his shoulders. "What about the rest of my men?" Jiraiya's expression froze for an excessive amount of time before settling into a ferocious smile. "Alive, which is more than I could say for you when I caught sight of your sorry ass." Kakashi said, "Ah," and gave him the benefit of the doubt. For now, alive was sufficient. It must have been. Didn't sound like there was enough time to gather up men and head all the way back, so I thought, why not summon you all? Jiraiya was the only one to casually consider sending an Enbu team across half the nation. Why not, in fact? What did you even use for a focus? Jiraiya got up and walked at a trot to the middle of the room, where 3 circles were drawn in dried blood that was dark reddish-brown. Your dog tags, he clarified, gesturing to the initial one. The final circle featured a pile of frayed black fabric that was dark with perspiration and blood, and the second circle read, Tenzu's medkit, stocked and stitched personally by Genma. Namiyashi was tough. No obvious material available, so your boy stripped his clothes off in hopes that maybe even a little of Namiyashi's blood was on it. Risky, Kakashi murmured. It worked, Jiraiya said with a shrug. They're upstairs right now, being seen too. With their nails digging blood-red crescents into the meaty flesh of his palm, Kakashi's left fingers clenched into a fist, and Kabuto? Jiraiya's dark eyes were hard and unreadable, and she said, I'm guessing he was pulled along for the ride because you were holding onto him pretty tightly. He's not to be trusted, Kakashi growled, remembering to raise his fist in a tight arc. With a voice as dry as the wind country desert, Jiraiya uttered, kind of gathered that, judging from the way you were choking what little life he had out of him. He's in max security, with every kind of chakra suppressant they have in this place. Ignoring the pain that flared up deep inside his lungs, Kakashi forced in a deep breath. He said, good, as steadily as he could. Resources, food, a hot bath, and time to reorganize and consider his next course of action were all provided by the grass outpost. There was enough time to concentrate on Kabuto and determine the purpose of his control. Rough mission. Beneath the mask, Kakashi smiled at him unevenly. I guess you could call it that, he remarked. Jiraiya straightened his back completely, squirming as joints crackled and popped. Keep yourself together, alright? He asked. I'd like to know that the next time I see you won't be at the wrong end of an Anbu mission. Take some time off, put yourself on the teaching rosters and take on a team. Live a little. My newest book just came out last year, you know. Branching out into a new genre, I think you'll like it. I'll get you a copy once we get all sorted out from this mess. I know, Kakashi uttered, relishing the older man's stunned expression. I've read it a few times over by now, it's good. Merciful heavens, Jiraiya murmured, massaging his scruffy face. Are you even old enough to read that kind of stuff? Kakashi paused, unsure of how to determine his age at this point. Was he 30 years old, or 20? Or maybe adding up the numbers was the trick. He gave in and said, old enough to drink, even. With his arms folded across his chest and his keen eyes fixed on everything, Jiraiya humped. Like the law ever mattered to you, he replied. Alright kiddo. Let's get you upstairs and into the hands of a medic.nin. Don't want you bleeding out on this damned floor. And once you're settled, I've gotta get going. Old man's probably gonna chew my ass out for being late. Kakashi flinched as Jiraiya put a steady arm around his shoulders, appreciating the help as he fought to move his legs. Are you going back to the village? He asked. His left arm, which he used to lean against the wall, was barely better. His right arm hung helplessly by his side, chakra coils blown out. Politics, Jiraiya spat, turning his head and almost blinding Kakashi with his thick bushy tail of hair. Looks like it's gearing up to be a real nasty fight between the council and the Uchiha. Kakashi's pulse faltered to a halt. His mouth going numb, he asked thickly, what do you mean? Uchiha Sasuke, Fugaku's second son. Well, sounds like he's gone missing and the Uchiha are blaming Danzo. The old goat's denying everything of course, and the Uchiha aren't happy. The councilors are upset with the Uchiha for making baseless accusations. Knives are being pointed everywhere and the old man's convinced that Danzo's gonna use this somehow and blow up the whole village, maybe even engineer his way into wearing the old hat. Jiraiya let out a sigh of annoy loudly on the ceramic floor. It's a fucking mess is what it is. Sasuke's gone missing. Jiraiya clutched Kakashi's shoulders as he clattered to a halt. Oi, stay with me here. What's wrong? There was no sign of Sasuke. Kakashi felt the world disappear beneath him as he closed his only eye. Oi, brat. I did not risk my life to save your fucking ass only for you to die in front of me, Kakashi. He had traveled so far, and it would all be in vain. Kakashi. Snap out of it, damn you. Is there a medic out there? Medic? The pack that Sasuke had killed himself to save was gone. Danzo was about to have his massacre, and Sasuke was probably dead. How could he have been so foolish as to fall for the trap with Kabuto waiting? He should never have left for this hopeless mission and should never have let them out of his sight. Kabuto. Tomo swirled languidly in a pool of blood red as he opened Obito's eye. Jiraiya's face moved slowly. There was a universe of meaning in every breath, and the time between eye blinks was a tiny eternity. Past, present, and future all became one amorphous entity, trapped in the whirling infinity of Obito's gift, as hundreds and thousands of possibilities came into being. Silently, Kakashi said, "Let go of me, are you mad? We need to get you to the infirmary." "Jiraiya," Kakashi uttered in an icy tone, "don't make me repeat myself." Reluctantly, slowly, Jiraiya stepped back. Seeing 1,000 emotions in the old man's face, Kakashi instantly dismissed them all. "Kakashi, what are you doing?" Kakashi's right hand was still clenched in a blackened and bloody fist as he looked down at it. "I'm going to finish what I started," he replied. "Tell me, where is the prisoner being held?" "Captain." Kakashi trusted Tenzo to catch up to him, so he didn't bother slowing down. Tenzo said, "You're leaving behind a trail of blood," in a low enough voice to be inaudible to Jiraiya, who was far behind. Instead of responding, Kakashi quickly inspected his subordinate to ensure the medics had cleaned him up. His cheeks had some color and his hands were recently bandaged, but his face was almost entirely covered in large purple bruises beneath his eyes. "Did you get your medkit back?" Tenzu's hand instinctively went to his waist, asking, "What?" "Yes, of course, but..." Kakashi extended his left hand and said, "If I could borrow it for a moment." "Captain." The sound of Jiraiya's wooden geta clacking against the floor broke the long silence. With deep furrows in his brow, Tenzo unclipped the pouch at his hip and handed it over slowly. Accepting it, Kakashi stopped and used the same hand to flick it open as best he could. He picked up a small vial of stimulant and a hypodermic needle after dry swallowing 2 soldier pills and spitting the plastic wrapping onto the floor. He met Tenzu's wide brown eyes and said calmly, "I will make sure that they see fit to restock your supplies. I'm going to need you to assist me with this." Tenzo sputtered. "That's not the point, Captain. You haven't slept in days, your chakra reserves are probably running low, your fist is a bloody mess and you've just been pulled through a long-distance human summoning. The backlash from that kind of space. Time manipulation should put you in bed for days, let alone all the other injuries you have. You need rest, not whatever it is you're doing right now." Kakashi gave him a look but remained silent. Jiraiya gave a backward snort. "Face it, kid. Kakashi's gone off his rocker." Tenzo said, "Jiraiya. Sama," with a dejected tone. "You've got to do something." Jiraiya shook his head after opening his mouth and pausing. He stated, "I don't think anyone can stop him at this point," in a tone that was significantly different. Kakashi looked down at Tenzo. "Well?" Tenzo took a deep breath. He said, "Assure me you'll see a medic after this." Kakashi lied and said, "Yes, I will," while Tenzo steadied his hands and drew up the vial, the golden liquid collecting in the glass tube. As the needle sank deeply into his arm muscle, Kakashi barely noticed the prick. Instead, he concentrated on the smoky streams of artificial chakra that began to circulate through his body. "It's done." "Good." Retaining the kit, Kakashi flexed his left hand while managing the slight tremors that were starting to show. It was sufficient. In order to confuse potential intruders, they had stopped at an intersection with physically unmarked white walls. After checking the chakra markers and flicking open Obito's eye, Kakashi turned the corner and faced the wide expanse of an empty wall. Chakra was burning deep into the wall in patterns that he could see with the Sharingan, twisting and turning like ghostly clockwork gears. He could have taken a moment at another time to examine the exquisite ceiling work, the small, intricate arrays that ticked in joyful harmony, each component contributing to the overall design. There was no more time for elaboration. Pulling his mask down, Kakashi took a deep bite out of his thumb, extracting blood. His chakra gave it an iridescent blue glow. When he had lowered his mask, Tenzo and Jiraiya had subtly turned their heads away, something Kakashi was somewhat appreciative of. Kakashi extended his hand as far as he could and made broad, sweeping strokes, each as thick and powerful as he could. There was just one figure, as tall and broad as a man. "Let go." Infusing his hand with as much chakra as he could manage, Kakashi slammed it against the wall. The Sharingan was blinded by the character's sudden, torch-like illumination. Unabated, Kakashi let the tears fall. Everywhere the seal touched the wall, cracks appeared, the chakra patterns breaking under the force of Kakashi's order. Pinching the bridge of his nose behind him, Jiraiya muttered something like, "Miserable little son of a bitch." In a whisper, Tenzo asked, "What did he do?" Jiraiya said, "Imagine you are in a china shop," without lowering his voice in the least. "Imagine hundreds of delicate porcelain dishes worth more than you own life in all these nice glass shelves. In this metaphor, by the way, the wall is the china shop. Jiraiya. Sama. Then imagine taking a sledgehammer and crushing everything. Pieces of plaster, wood, and stone fell to the ground in a dust cloud as the wall broke. In between the swaying pillars of smoke, chakra flared and crackled in bright blue bursts like lightning. It appeared as though a tiny thunderstorm had formed in the middle of the corridor, portending rain at the end. Ah, Tenzo replied. I see. Kakashi ignored the warning sirens blazing over his head as he picked his way around the debris. As Kakashi entered the secret room that the broken wall had revealed, agape, mouthed Yamanaka held a pile of documents to her chest. Where is he? She gazed incomprehensibly at him. Where is he? Kakashi repeated, allowing his desire to kill to permeate the entire space. The Yamanaka said, you broke the seals, with wide blue eyes and a stilt. Kakashi growled. With a big smile, Jiraiya swept past him and grabbed the woman by the shoulders. Hanako. Chan. Well, you've only grown more beautiful since I last saw you. When she saw Jiraiya peeking down her shirt, she shuddered and appeared to awaken from her reverie, her cheeks turning a vivid red. Jiraiya. Sama. Jiraiya smiled and rubbed the spot on his cheek where she had slapped him, and just as strong as I remembered too. Sorry about the mess, Kakashi's just a little overexcited, you know how it is. After swallowing, Hanako turned to face the wall that had once separated the main outpost from the interrogation cells. Saying, no, not really, for a moment, her gaze shifted to Kakashi. I know it's a pain, but we're looking for the newest prisoner brought in just now. Goes by the name Kabuto, gray hair. With a sharp tone, Hanako declared, he's not fit to be questioned, he's been seriously injured and I haven't even been able to give him the full pat-down physically, let alone mentally. He could have a cyanide tooth or a mental genjutsu planted on him. It's not safe. He won't kill himself, stated Kakashi bluntly, I won't let him. But, she swallowed her objections as Kakashi gazed at her, seeing the wide, unblinking eye of Obito. He's in Unit 6A. Kakashi swept past her and through the doorway that was discreetly tucked away in the corner and only marked by a tiny seal. Desks and filing cabinets occupied the remainder of the space. The only other doorway featured a huge, gaudy padlock that Kakashi suspected was merely decorative. With his thumb still dripping blood, he applied a smaller release seal, but the seal on the doorjamb tore like wet paper. When he opened the door, the first thing he smelled was the overpowering smell of bleach. Everything was so thoroughly clean that he could barely distinguish between the ceiling and the floor. There were no clocks, windows, or even artwork on the walls to indicate the time or place. Not even light. Kakashi entered the tiny fragment of eternity and made his way to the only cell that was occupied. Using all of his strength, Kakashi blasted through rice paper and ink as he pressed his bloody hand against the cell door seal. A chamber pot was fastened to the floor beside a metal cot that was bolted to the wall as the cast iron door silently swung inward. Medical seals concealed the huge hole in Kabuto's middle as he lay chained to his bed. His eyes were closed as though he was sleeping, and his chest rose in shallow gasps. Kakashi pulled down his mask and leaned over the sleeping boy. Hello, Kabuto, he said with a smile that revealed his teeth. Kakashi savored the sickly sour smell of fear as Kabuto's black eyes snapped open. After saying, we were very rudely interrupted before, he pulled out a new kunai. Why don't we begin again? Even evil bosses kept their offices neat. With his mask loosely fastened to his hip, Shisui entered the room in full uniform. Uncle Fugaku had a neat set of invoice boxes in his office, and the desk was empty. The walls were lined with bookcases containing dusty tomes and philosophical treatises from the Shodai period. There were no windows, which revealed much more about the man than the books he read or the office equipment he used. Uchiha Shisui, isn't it, Councilman? Shisui instinctively dropped to his knees, his fist to his heart. From the corner of his eye, he could just make out deep black folds of cloth sweeping along the floor as a cane tapped steadily on the floorboards. Danzo formally said, you may rise, agent, and Shisui effortlessly raised himself back up to his feet without looking directly at the man. Allow me to congratulate you on your successful admission to the Corps, Uchiha-kun. I'm sure your skills would be of great use to the Hokage and the village. Shisui lowered his head slightly. You honor me with your words, Councilman. You must be wondering why I've called you to this meeting. Sir. When Danzo raised a hand, Shisui fell silent at once. He smiled creakily at Shisui and said, no, let's not beat around the bush here. I'm afraid since my retirement I've grown rather tired of shinobi circuitousness. Shisui took a swallow. The Sandaime personally nominated you for service, Danzo said quietly. I want to know why. Black eyes hard, Shisui looked up for the first time at Danzo. I asked him, was all he said. Asked. Danzo appeared stunned for a moment before he threw back his head and laughed, his shoulders trembling. You asked him. Sage willing. This sounds exactly like something Hiruzen would agree to. Sir, Shisui uttered rigidly. No offense meant on your part, Danzo said with a smile and a clap of one hand on the table. Just an age-old philosophical disagreement I've had with my friend. Well then, young Uchiha-kun. What drove you to ask this of the Hokage himself? Naturally, Shisui's hands clenched into white, knuckled fists. I felt that I had the opportunity to serve the village with the skills that I had. Anbu would have better use for my talents than any other mission available through ordinary channels. Danzo leaned forward in his chair, his face unreadable, and asked, Oh, and why not wait until you were properly nominated and presented as a candidate? Iya. Shisui averted her gaze. Slowly, my cousin, he said. Perhaps you've heard of him? Danzo made an unintelligible sound and asked, Uchiha Itachi. Yes, I suppose you could say I am aware of him. Shisui remarked, he has already been nominated and sworn in to serve the Corps, while observing from a distance the slight tremors in his trembling fists, which seemed to belong to a different man, at the age of 12. Commendable. Shouting, I am useful as well, Shisui said. I am a Uchiha as well. I have unparalleled mastery of the Sharingan not found in elders thrice my age, let alone my age mates. I too wish to serve the village in my own way. I knew that my clan would see Itachi in the Corps and be satisfied, and the rest of the village would know no better. Is there not room enough for more than one Uchiha in the service? Shisui sighed and glanced at his AN shoes. The leather had not yet been exposed to fire or blood, and it was smooth and uncracked. Can they not see beyond their own illusions? Danzo said, Ah, and Shisui looked up in surprise. The old man's eye was as bright as the flashing carapace of a beetle. Oh yes, he muttered. I think you'll do very well indeed, Uchiha Shisui. Shisui ran a hand through his oily hair and muttered, I'm sorry, I just don't have a lot of time. He looked at the rumbling washing machine numbly. The woman said politely, 2 cups of detergent, gesturing to the orange bottle by his feet. Shisui knelt down and fumbled her fingers against the plastic handle, saying, Oh, yes of course. He barely noticed the splashing of a thick, syrupy blue liquid on his toes and the ground because he was too busy pouring it directly into the drum. After a while, he dropped back to the floor and closed the lid because it appeared that 2 cups had entered. Are you sure you're not being followed? And Aburame was folding his stack of jackets when Shisui jerked his shoulder to the back. The woman's hands flashed metal as she tensed. Don't worry, Shisui said, using his uniform pants to wipe his sticky hands. I've convinced him that nothing really is going on right now. Just doing my laundry on my off day like any other rookie operative desperate for clean clothes. Her voice was tight as she asked, Are you sure? Shisui smiled at her wearily. He stretched out the kinks in his muscles and rolled his shoulders, saying, I have to be, to do this kind of stuff. He said, It's a thing I do, while hazily gesturing toward his eyes. I build truths and sell them to people to believe. I'm pretty okay at it, I guess. He continued, following her disbelieving expression, I try not to do it on people I like. It's not very good at maintaining healthy relationships, you know. The woman said, Ah, and resumed unloading her own laundry load. So, how's life in the Corps? He put his hands in his pockets and looked at the washing machine, saying, I'm adjusting okay. My new friends just took me to a nice club down by the warehouse district. Creepy atmosphere, but it was worth it for the great mixed drinks. She arched an eyebrow. Informing her, I've never lived by myself before, it's fun. I've even been cooking for myself now. So, ramen? Baby steps. He used the tip of his foot to kick the machine's base. A sharp, enlightening pain exploded in his toes. Shisui made an effort to maintain the emotion. I still haven't figured out who's dating who and all the gossip about the members keeps flying over my head, but it's always like that when you join a new group. I feel like I'm gonna be playing catch-up for a while. The woman huffed as she picked up the laundry basket at her feet and slammed the door to the machine's drum shut. Sounds rough. How are you doing with the mission quota? The back of Shisui's throat caught his breath. Forcefully, I'm getting there, he said. I just need a little more time. She hitched the basket to her hip and said, Remember the bigger picture. She smiled slyly at him while tossing her long, wild hair over her shoulders. She winked and said, See you later, Shinobi-san, maybe I'll take you up on that offer sometime. Shisui dutifully said, Call me, and passed a crumpled piece of paper, before she turned away and swayed her hips, The flirtatious expression on her face briefly subsided into solemnity. As he drifted up to the dryer the woman had just left, a man said, "Now that's a fine ass honey," with a laundry bag slung casually over his shoulder. "You get her number?" Shisui said, "I saw her first," and his eyes briefly turned red. "Right?" The man put his laundry down and asked blankly, "Who? Are you talking to me?" A flat line thinned out of Shisui's mouth. He walked blindly towards the exit, turning away and saying, "Sorry, I thought you were someone I knew." "A little more time, please." Shisui's head bowed. He shivered awake at the ring of the morning bell, and the headache returned. If he considered it, the pain was round, large, and crashing like the ocean waves he had once seen on television. But since it would only exacerbate the pain, he didn't like to think about it much or anything at all. It was better to sleep. He shut his eyes. He felt something grab hold of his shoulder and give him a violent shake. "You have to get up or they'll take away your food again." He tried to ignore it, curling tightly into a ball. "Hey." His teeth ached, just like the last time he tried biting on aluminum foil, as the blanket abruptly vanished and cold air swept across his skin. "New kid." Swiping at the hand, he hissed angrily. "You've got to get up. I know it sucks. But you've got to start eating or they'll take you away somewhere else. Somewhere bad." A warm thing embraced his face. "All right." He opened his eyes, allowing gentle, hazy shapes to gradually come into focus. The face of a large child with odd snow-colored white hair was staring directly at him. "Good," the older child said, and his smile widened even more. "Time for breakfast." Even though the big kid's eyes were brown rather than black and his hair was all wrong, it felt like he was back for a little while. To keep the tears from streaming out, he tightly squinted his eyes. "Is he sick, Ni-san?" "He will be if he doesn't get his butt out of bed," complained the older child. "Here, grab his arm, I'll get the rest." He felt like he was being pulled out of bed. He thrashed wildly before his legs struck the chilly concrete floor, and he let out a yelp, the sound of the crashing waves in his head almost drowning out everything else. "Ah, I thought I told you to grab his arm." "I did." He glanced up blearily at the two boys above him, wiping his eyes quickly with the back of his sleeve. Like his cousins, the other child was smaller, had dark hair, black eyes, and pale white skin, similar to his family. He croaked, "Who are you guys?" "I'm number 16, smiled the older child with the white hair. With a thumb jerk, he said, "And this?" To the boy with the dark hair. "This is my little brother. He's number 22. What about you, new kid?" "I'm." "You have lost your name. They're not necessary for tools." "I'm 30.6, he declared. Under the blankets and in the dark, he told them stories about the outside world. Like on TV, there's this show about samurai, except they're all different colors and they have swords and stuff. Curiosity prompted 16 to ask, "TV? I thought it was that box they show all those boring lessons and stuff on. Like how to sharpen your kunai and stuff like that." 30.6 said, "That too," while raising his hands. "But it's like a box for videos and stuff, and then every Saturday morning, a video comes on about these samurai guys." 20.2 gave a warning pinch to both of them, while 16 and 30.6 acted as the blankets at his feet and spoke animatedly. He was the one feigning to sleep like a boy. It would be 20.2's turn to quarrel over the stories 30.6 was telling, and 16's turn to go to sleep tomorrow. "Sounds boring," said 16, and 30.6 attempted to punch him beneath the blankets during a brief altercation. Threatening, "If it's so boring then you can go back to sleep." 16 said, "Ah, I'm just kidding," and they fell silent. "So, what about these samurai guys?" "Well, they're like warriors, only they don't have chakra, they just have swords and they all have their own color. And the red one's the leader. And they're traveling throughout the world to fight evil monsters and save the world and bring honor back to their old country." "Huh," said 16. Lulled by tales of the Super Sentai samurai warriors and their exploits in defending the peasantry and saving the world, 20.2 gradually fell asleep. 30.6 told 16 a different story, one that was both strange and frightening enough to keep him grounded in this world, just before the final waves carried him away into the darkness. "Do you remember your real name?" "What?" 20.2 heard the fear in 16's voice for the first time in his life. 36 insisted, "Not the numbers, but our real names, like how the instructors have names like Iwato or Kazuhito." I'm sorry," said 30.6 abruptly. "I ought not to have spoken." Before 16 finally spoke up, there was a long silence that was so profound that 20.2 people nearly believed they had all fallen asleep. 16 muttered, "I don't remember, referring only to the number I had at the previous location before they moved us all into this large building and renumbered us. Before that, I was 8, and 20.2 was 50.6. He probably doesn't know either. Perhaps. 16 sounded uncertain. 30.6 said, I know my real name, in a voice so quiet that 20.2 could hardly hear him. They will injure you for that. They took my ear away from me, he whispered fiercely, but they can't take my name away. 20.2 could feel 30.6 moving around, her hand grazing his leg. You're one of the dumbest, stupidest and bravest little kids I know. 20.2 nodded in silence. He writhed slightly, curious, but if Ni.San didn't inquire. Can you tell me? 36 shuddered. Are you going to swear not to tell? I promise. 16 swore. I am Uchiha Sasuke. Even though a tiny, remote part of him shrank from the blood on his hands from his sword, which dried into permanent brown stains on his boots, it was simple to get into a routine. He understood that the real purpose of the mask was to hide from himself, not to frighten or hide his identity from others. He was now merely one of 100, a faceless, shadow. Hunched figure devoid of any conscience or independent thought. He thought of the snarling silhouette of the laughing fox, dangling from the hook by his bedside table, its teeth exposed, its whiskers etched in swirls of black and crimson on the porcelain surface. Foxes had never really appealed to him. Shisui put on his cloak, put the mask on his face, and started working. More than anything else, the lack of sound roused him. 36 protruded his head from his bed, rubbing his eyes and fighting the impulse to itch the bandage covering his head. He could see the other children gradually waking up around him. Some appeared pale and ill, as if they were going to throw up, while others appeared more like they needed to use the restroom urgently. 16 was quietly sitting with his legs crossed on top of his bed. 20.2 sat beside him on the floor, head cocked to the ceiling. The strangest thing of all, according to 30.6 people, was that nobody made any noise. It was as if they all had the same lump in their throats and a constricted sensation in their chests that prevented them from speaking. However, he had to. The silence was broken by his hoarse, scratchy voice asking, "What's going on?" With his fingers clasped together like a monk performing his devotions, 16 asked, "Can't you hear it?" It wasn't until 20.2 finally spoke up that 30.6 truly understood. There's no morning bell. Bright surgical lights chased out all the shadows in the room, erasing the color from their cheeks as they lay in tidy rows, 6 by 6, on spotless white tables. Blue arcs of chakra danced in time with 30.6 steady heartbeats on thick black cables that ran across the room and were fastened to their heads. As he gazed down at the laboratory spread out below him through the glass panes separating the room below and the observatory, Danzo said slowly and thoughtfully, "Time is something that I always seem to be short of." Shisui remained silent. His masked face was lowered to the ground as he knelt on one knee. His mask was made of heavy porcelain, and he could feel his own hot breath curl against his skin. Small black strips of darkness obscured the edges of his vision through the eye holes in his mask. Danzo paused and rubbed his thumb against the wooden handle of his cane before saying, "I had plans for the boy, since perhaps even before his conception. What better way to kill the father than with the son?" He pictured Sasuke smiling as he gazed down at his father's body, a kunai hanging from one tiny, boyish hand, the crimson-red pinwheels spinning in his eyes. Danzo raised a hand, and the masked agent below immediately straightened and saluted, his badger mask glistening with reflected light. "But, in this way too, he will serve Konoha as well, reborn as a perfect soldier. His mind will be molded into something new, something better. Harder, stronger. The perfect tool." Seal characters spiraled out from all around him in maze. Like tangles before joining the long black chakra cables as he stood in the middle of a gigantic array. From a gap in the hood of his cloak, his long yellow hair was visible, tied back in a practical cue. As the agent brought his hands together and his fingers twisted into seal signs, his hand started to fall. Shisui yelled, "Release," as his eyes turned red with Sharingan. Letting go, he struck through all the delicate chakra strings and ripped through all the meticulous illusions he had collected. The agent fell to the ground in a pile of technicolor lights, broken into 100 fragments of reality. A glistening heap of broken genjutsu on top of the seal array was the only source of light in the lab before it, too, vanished into oblivion. "Uchiha," Danzo spat in a low, lethal voice that was simultaneously an invocation and a curse. "So, this is when you choose to betray me at last?" Fire erupted from his hands, bringing his face's jagged planes into stark relief and creating odd shadows on the scars that ran the length of his cheek. Intoxicating. Heady waves of smoke and shimmering heat rose up and around the rafters of the ceiling as they caught fire. The glass windows behind them shattered warningly. Danzo went on in that low voice, his perfectly controlled rage transformed into lethality. Agent Shu? Shisui declared, dead, and took his blade out of its sheath. As much as I sorrow for his loss, I cannot allow this to happen. In the name of the Sandaime Hokage, upon his request and his command, I arrest you on highest charges of treason, murder and the endangerment of Konoha's citizens. Oh, a dreadful sound arose from the hollow depths of Danzu's chest as he laughed. You dare accuse me of treason? Boy, what I am doing is for the good of the village, to protect it from weakness and poison. You think I don't know what your elders are planning, what Hiruzen refuses to see? Shisui said, be that as it may, as calmly as he could. In his hand, the sword never faltered. That doesn't justify your actions, Shimura Danzo. Will you comply with the law? Danzu's voice grew harder and quieter as she asked, and you? Your hands are just as marked as I am, child. You are blind if you cannot see that he is using you as well, his own hidden sword in the darkness. Shisui repeated, be that as it may, his voice trembling with anger, fear, and 100 other terrifying emotions. But you hurt my cousin, you bastard. With chakras singing in his veins, he sprang forward. Danzo drew his hands in a seal and grinned. He said, now, and the room burst into flames. In order to allow the silver moonlight to enter his designated room at the outpost, Kakashi pulled open the shades of his window. Through the glass panes, a laughing cat could be seen, its smooth face slashed with whiskers like dark slashes. A hand hovered over the glass, balled into a fist. Had Tenzo knocked on his window that fateful night, white-faced and shaking with terror, only a month before? Had it only been 2 months since Kakashi woke up in the fragmented nightmares of his past and died in the midst of a war-torn future? 10 years. Like water leaking up through the spaces between his fingers and back into his cupped palms. Had that been all that had happened? Tenzo whispered, Captain, as his chakra coiled in on itself and flickered, Genma. Good men perished, blood swept the land, and life continued on as usual, with time moving forward indefinitely even in this unlikely, impossible world. Kakashi's head bowed. I know. At the very least, they were kind. Soft cloths infused with herbs and stitched with seals of purity were used to carefully wash his body. His hair was tied with a customary white ribbon after being combed and braided into a tidy queue. Lastly, they draped his body on an unrolled ceremonial sealing scroll with black serpentine coils of symbols, and tied a black armband embroidered with a silver spiraling leaf around his arm. In order to secure Shiranui Genma for the final trip home, a medic gently signed him and bound his body to paper and ink. Kakashi exited the morgue and entered the attached infirmary room, shutting the door behind him. He paused before an empty stasis chamber, tubing lying limp and detached by the glass sides as he watched the water infused with chakra slowly drain through a grid in the floor. Water. Stained and wrinkled, a placard bearing Genma's name was still hanging in the chamber's corner. He sighed meditatively, get a scraping on the tiled floor. Sometimes, Jiraiya said next to him, puffs of breath swirling around his mouth as he spoke, lips blue. Tinged from the cold air, the body just passes on anyway, organs shut down, and the cells die off, even with a support system in place. Perhaps it's better that it ended this way. Kakashi watched the blood. Flecked water circle the drain, a swirling vortex forming. Silently, he stated, he was too far past normal healing. You don't think maybe if Tsunade had been Jiraiya? No, Jiraiya said in a tone that was almost too gentle, not even she could have brought him back. Something that resembled hysterical laughter rose in Kakashi's chest, choking his lungs and tightening like a vice around his heart. How could he have possibly believed that 10 years of experience and 10 years of failed attempts would have been sufficient to correct his own past errors? The issue was never with the past, he was always the one. With Pein standing over the corpse and his students dispersed throughout the ruins of the world, broken and shattered, he had never been good enough and he had never been good enough now, then, or even in the future. Raida was barely surviving, Sasuke was missing, the likelihood of the Uchiha massacre was increasing, and now a possibly worst of all Genma was dead. Something warm settled on Kakashi's shoulder, and he tasted salt and copper on his tongue, with waves of chakra flowing steadily from it. With a voice that sounded distant, Jiraiya yelled, don't you even consider collapsing on me, boy. Get your shit together. In the dark, Kakashi became aware that he had bitten his tongue clean, causing blood to collect in his mouth and discolor his tooth cracks. He spat on the ground and dragged his frayed mask down unsteadily. Jagged drops of crimson splattered across the white tiles. He was led toward a chair at the far end of the room by Jiraiya's hand, which pressed harder against his shoulder. Kakashi's limbs moved on their own, and he followed almost helplessly. At Genma's name, he couldn't take his eyes off the almost empty stasis chamber. Heady waves of chakra still coursing through him from Jiraiya's constant, unflinching touch, he sank into the chair at another prod. Kakashi. Genma Shiranui. What is your name, rank and registration number, soldier? Kakashi said, Hitaki Kakashi, Junin of Konoha, registration 009720, without thinking, his well-known, stale words gushing out of him. At least you're not catatonic, Jiraiya remarked in a slightly wry tone. His mane of spiky gray hair filled Kakashi's entire field of vision as he knelt down. The bulk of Jiraiya's chest and his enormous chakra presence, which lurked in his bones like a banked fire, blocked out the stasis chamber and the placard that was attached to it. Jiraiya's chakra flow slowed to a trickle, but Kakashi could feel it rushing through his parched chakra coils. Fire affinity calling to fire. I've only seen you like this once before, Kakashi, and it was just yesterday for a few seconds, right before you went on a cold-blooded rampage and nearly murdered the prisoner. I need you to help me understand, Kakashi, because I don't know how to reconcile this man sitting before me and the one I saw a few months ago at the festival. You look the same. You wear the same blacks, the same Enbu armor. But I swear to the heavens and the Sage of Six Paths, you're not the same person. What changed? What's going on right now? How odd that he had attended this man's funeral and that Jiraiya was now alive, Kakashi thought slowly. How odd that Genma had survived and that he would now have a funeral in this jumbled, messed up hell of a past. Kakashi said, I was supposed to save them, with responsibility. My kids, my pack, my team. I couldn't. I can't because I'm not good enough. Pain blazed brightly like a bolt of lightning, cracking across his cheek like a whip. Don't you dare follow your father into the darkness, Jiraiya said icily, his hand still up there from slapping Kakashi's cheek. I've already seen one Hitaki walk down this path and that's one too many. You can't blame yourself for events out of your damned control, brat. Shiranui died a good death, a soldier's death in service to the village. Kakashi's leaden limbs suddenly gained energy from a white-hot rage that burned the fog from his mind. You don't understand. When Jiraiya said, you're damn right I don't, she shot back. I know this isn't the first time you've had a teammate die on you, but it is the first time I've seen you lose it like this. What's different, this time? Why is it fucking you up like this? Because it's not just Genma. It's Sasuke, it's Naruto and Sakura, and the whole damned Uchiha clan. It's Danzo and Root and Akatsuki. Kakashi began to spit. I came back to try and save my pack and all I've done is just make everything worse. Jiraiya's lips did not close completely. He said, I need you to untangle that for me, after a protracted pause. How is Naruto, Uzumaki Naruto of all people involved in all of this? And Fugaku's missing son? And what's all this about Danzo and an aka whatever? You coming back? Although it was difficult to explain, the transfer, time travel, or whatever the hell Kakashi was supposed to call this had never really been a secret. Instead, it had been simpler to adopt the persona of his younger self, to act different from who he really was, and then to take his own discrete actions to alter the course of events. In the broken remains of his ruined schemes, Kakashi was at a loss for words. Jiraiya said, you're really doing a splendid job of convincing me you haven't gone completely off your rocker, with a faint smile forming in the corner of his mouth. At last, Kakashi stated, it's complicated, and I'm not sure if you really will believe me anyway. Raking his hand through his thick curls, Jiraiya remarked, there's got to be something better than you just staring at me like this. He added, are you going all quiet again, in a very quiet voice. Kakashi paused and cleared his throat, saying, I am actually 30 years old. Somehow, I managed to travel back in time and enter my younger, 20-year-old body. Jiraiya suffocated. In 6 years, when I was or will be 20.6, I was assigned a genin team that included Uchiha Sasuke, Uzumaki Naruto, and Haruno Sakura. The team fell apart because of my own shortcomings, Kakashi said, letting his voice fall into the rhythmic cadences he normally used to give reports, detached from the situation. From my own personal recollection, in 1 year's time, Uchiha Itachi will murder every single member of his clan, save his brother, Uchiha Sasuke, in order to protect the village from a coup engineered by his clan. Sasuke betrayed the village to join with Orochimaru and later killed his brother and made several attempts on his former teammates' lives, and mine. An organization composed of missing Nin also made several attempts on Naruto's life and on the village in order to extract the Kyuubi's chakra. The head of this organization, known as Akatsuki, eventually breached Konoha's walls and invaded the village. I died during the battle and found myself waking up, here, 10 years in the past. Between them, silence stretched until it reached a breaking point. So, Jiraiya said, his forehead furrowed as he obviously struggled to comprehend what Kakashi had said. His voice trailed off as his face settled into an unreadable mask. That's why you flew off the handle when I reported Sasuke's disappearance. And an invasion of Konoha, of all the possibilities, he said. Kakashi's rage and frustration from earlier swiftly subsided as he felt a wave of exhaustion sweep over him. He was exhausted, worn out, and most of all, afraid of what the future might still hold. I can definitely see why you thought I wouldn't. Why I don't believe you, Kakashi. Time travel? Jiraiya raised his eyebrows. He whispered, prophecies and talking sage toads, I can do. But this stuff? He exhaled sharply. Kakashi remarked, I can show you your funeral. Jiraiya froze. Kakashi created an illusion out of memories and dreams by drawing Jiraiya's own chakra, which he had borrowed, inside himself with heavy, numb fingers. He said, watch, and opened Obito's eyes so Jiraiya could see. Kakashi could still recall the sensation of his formal blacks on his skin and the scent of scented detergent and mothballs, even without Obito's eye to permanently imprint it in his mind. Only a few clouds were visible in the sky on this hot and muggy summer morning. The day was lovely. In front of the memorial was a framed photograph of Jiraiya, bordered with black ribbons. This was a far more recognizable face than the living man next to him, who was a little older and had deeper laugh lines and wrinkles. Jiraiya swore quietly under his breath next to him. As the illusion evolved, it showed Naruto's hunched back and the mound of chrysanthemums in front of the memorial. Jiraiya uttered the words, he looks just like Minato, after pausing. Kakashi said, you took him on as your apprentice, later on, pointing to the two squat frogs that were seated next to Naruto. He learned how to summon toads, among other things. Jiraiya began, his face turning pale beneath his deep brown tan. Fukasaku and Shima. There's no way you've ever seen them before. This is all just an illusion, Noda. A memory, Kakashi concluded for him before releasing the chakra strands. Around them, reality set in as the sweltering summer day gave way to the immaculate white walls of the outpost hospital. In front of him, Jiraiya was kneeling with his hands clasped together as though in prayer. The expression on his face could have been almost comical at any other time. Kakashi felt nothing but fear now. Kakashi said, now you see what's really at stake, in a slow, weary voice. His head sank into his palms. Obito's eye throbbing endlessly behind his battered Konoha band. Sasuke's missing and I know that Danzo is involved in this whole mess, instigating and maneuvering himself into power. We're maybe days away from the massacre happening again. Something solid and hard struck Kakashi's skull, and he said, I'm still not exactly sure what's going on, but I know this. As Jiraiya pounded his fist against Kakashi's head, blue and white stars sped across Kakashi's vision. Jiraiya said, you idiot, but his kind demeanor contradicted his behavior. Too stunned to do more than blink foolishly at Jiraiya's face, Kakashi flinched. Let me guess, this is the first time you've told anyone about this thing? Kakashi gave a stupid nod. And let me make another educated guess. You thought you could handle this all by yourself, huh? Kakashi turned to face the other man this time, his mouth hanging open. Not your team, your Anbu squad, not me and definitely not the old man Hokage, right? Jiraiya sighed, his thoughts breaking and spinning into 1,000 incomprehensible fragments, his black eyes full of a warmth that Kakashi couldn't comprehend. Jiraiya went on in the same tone, have you ever considered that we might even want to assist you? You don't have to handle everything by yourself, save the world, or solve all the problems. To chastise and lecture, his fist flattened out, his hand now ruffling Kakashi's spiky silver hair as though he were a boy once more. Teamwork, said Jiraiya plainly. As he closed it, Kakashi's eyes started to prickle with heat. Obito's eyes started to cry beneath his Konoha headband. Let's figure out how to get back home and kick some asses, Jiraiya said angrily. Shisui was able to devote all of his chakra to the most significant body flicker of his life because the Sharingan witnessed the world breaking just before it actually did. He caught the minuscule facial muscle movements with the Sharingan, projecting, assessing, and computing in less than a heartbeat, and he saw Danzo mouth something seconds before his lips even moved. Just as the ceiling started to shake and fissures appeared in the ground, he smashed through the glass pane between the laboratory and the observation room, passing Danzo's momentarily exposed torso. Now, Danzo grinned, and the room burst into flames, with fire and stone pelting down from the sky and the building's walls and ceilings collapsing in on themselves. Mid. Jump. Shisui dropped his sword, and his hands poured all of his energy into the jutsu as they blurred through half a dozen seals at a dizzyingly fast pace. Debris rained down around him and the other kids, who were lying as motionless as corpses in the crumbling laboratory, while Sasuke's face looked up at him in a tranquil, drugged sleep. Shisui wanted to yell, "I'm here, cousin, I'm here," despite the smoke and ash filling his lungs. He fell to the ground and slammed his hands into the floor. With waves of earth reaching up and around to form a perfect dome to protect the children, the laboratory erupted as blue waves of chakra rippled out from the epicenter of his hands. The room was enveloped in perfect darkness. As the explosion continued outside the dome, Shisui flinched as he felt the ground rumble and shake all around him, with pieces of buildings and chakra fire falling on his construct. As he put more energy into the jutsu, sweat trickled down the back of his neck. To simply keep Sasuke safe, it would have been much simpler to entice him to leave this building and flee for his life. With his Sharingan detecting 30.6 beating hearts and 30.6 flowing chakra signatures, Shisui turned to face the rows and rows of sleeping children. The dark earthen dome was illuminated with a stunning luminescence that was visible only to the Sharingan. He couldn't possibly leave them all behind. Distracted, he extended his senses to scan the room, verifying the safety of his construct and the well-being of his 30.6 tiny charges. It was already too late when he saw the small chakra signature at the southern part of the dome. With an ugly noise, it fell open, revealing a flaming light inside the dome and illuminating peaceful, sleeping faces with long shadows. Great slabs of concrete were rupturing the earth and creating 100 tiny tremors every second as the sound of falling rocks grew louder. Danzo, brandishing Shisui's sword, bent slightly to enter the opening and the shattered dome. With chakra hardened blades in their hands, a root shadow lingered at his heels. Danzo said, "You disappoint me, Uchiha," his scruffy face encased in an unreadable mask. "I rather expected more from you than this." In response, Shisui spat on the ground. "Well," said Danzo, unfazed. "That's what you get for allowing your emotions and morals to cloud your mind and your duty. If you'd been smarter about this and abandoned the children, you most likely would have been able to escape with your life." "Fuck you," Shisui uttered softly. Danzo said, his smile gone. "Finish him, but leave the eyes intact. I want to harvest them." With its blades twirling menacingly in the reflected firelight, the shadow broke free from Danzo's heels and lunged towards Shisui. Shisui waited for the ideal opportunity while gazing up at the cloaked figure and the thin piece of white mask that was visible in the low light. Eyesight was unreliable and only worked well when combined with Dujutsu, and even then, results were uncertain with the Sharingan. Sound was difficult, required intense focus, and was notoriously inefficient considering the chakra use. And touch was the simplest and easiest way for Genjutsu to take hold in the subject. Shisui only required his personal chakra. Blue flashes of light blurred in the air as the root agent leapt into the air and headed for Shisui, its dual blades weaving a perilous web of steel. With one hand still attached to the construct through the ground, Shisui raised the other and made a single half-seal. Blades skittered to the ground as the shadowed figure fell like a rock, landing in front of Danzo's feet with a clatter. Losing the Sharingan, the expensive construct he was maintaining and finding it difficult to rebuild with each bombardment, and now the Genjutsu to eliminate the agent, Shisui stumbled as his chakra levels dropped dangerously low. Danzo cast a disgusted glance at the ground and his tool's rumpled form. "Filth," he uttered softly. Shisui's hair was now completely soaked in sweat and stuck to his scalp as he fought to control his labored breathing. He said, "He deserved a better master than you," while clenching his free hand into a fist that was white, knuckled and tight. At least the death was swift and painless. Shisui had created an illusion that, in less than a heartbeat, raised the person's level of fear and adrenaline to a deadly degree. In most cases, the heart fell in a matter of seconds. Danzo took a slow step forward, his stride steady and powerful even without a cane, and said, "I've heard rumors of your abilities." Or maybe, Shisui thought slowly, his mind clouded by chakra fatigue. Danzo had never needed it at all. But to see proof of it in person is quite different. With the sword raised in the air, he steadily aimed it at Shisui's heart. "All I do for Konoha," he said solemnly before dropping the sword. In order to prepare one last illusion, Shisui gathered the last of his chakra within himself and tensed, lifting his free hand into another half-seal. Danzo took a step forward and with his body fixed to the floor and the dome structure he was supporting, Shisui watched in horror as the Sharingan read Danzo's movements towards Sasuke's table. Spending valuable seconds, Shisui glanced at the other kids, the Sharingan noticing the feeble flow of their chakra, before turning back to face Danzo as his figure approached, Shisui's own sword getting closer to Sasuke's heart. Without his continuous chakra support, the dome would collapse if he left his position because it couldn't sustain the force of the collapsing building. In whatever tiny pockets of air formed, the kids would perish as some crushed, others slowly suffocating. Sasuke would perish if he did not. Shisui knew in his heart that he had already decided long before this particular moment ever arrived. With his hands ripped from the floor, he launched himself into a final body flicker. The dome moaned as it started to slowly collapse around him. As the sword went through Shisui's ribs, it punched through his lungs and scraped against bone. As Sasuke coughed blood onto the ground, Shisui doubled over his body, his back bending over the young boy's face. "Softly, useless boy," said Danzo. "You've always been predictable." Shisui smiled up at him, his bruised mouth ringing with bits of bloody foam. "Yeah?" he said in a raspy voice. When Shisui said, "Surprise, motherfucker," she laughed. Above them, the dome ceased to tremble and started to glow a strong, dazzling blue iridescent, swiftly reassembling itself into a single, coherent whole. Shisui almost passed out from the agony of Danzo's vicious sword ripping, with blood oozing from his chest and throat as he felt one lung slowly give way. "How did you?" Danzo spat out in a shout. Shisui's eyes swam with stars and dots as he fought for breath. "Did you really think that I would attack you without alerting someone for backup?" he gasped. "The cavalry's finally arrived, asshole. You better run now if you don't want to get your ass caught." He could hardly see Danzo's outline anymore, even with the Sharingan. From a distance, Shisui assumed that his vision was being taken away by the pain, blood loss, and possibly even oxygen deprivation. At a greater distance, Shisui believed he might be dying. "Your eyes, at least I can have your eyes." With a shaky smile, Shisui pawned a kunai from an arm holster, as natural and comfortable to him as breathing had been. Shisui said, "No," and went blind. Shisui dreamed that the world was burning. Shisui discovered that he could no longer care about the difference, or maybe it was fire. "Amaterasu of the heavens, answer my prayers, please, damn it. Shisui, wake up, please, Shisui." Shisui thought, there might have been one final thing he was concerned about. Whispering, "Itachi," he raised a hand to his cousin's face. Itachi sobbed, "Oh, Shisui, your eyes." Shisui could sense his little cousin's face dripping with hot, salty tears. "Shish," Shisui reassured him, smoothing Itachi's jaw with his thumb. "Sasuke?" Itachi uttered the words, "Safe, he's safe, they're all of them safe," with uncertainty in his voice. "All 36 of them, Shisui, you big damn hero." Shisui sighed and let his hand fall. Good," he said. It seemed as though all of the energy in his body had abruptly left him in that one breath. "Kurenaya." Shisui rummaged through his flitting thoughts, searching for what he had once considered significant but now appeared to have forgotten. For a moment, faded memories of a wild-haired, red-eyed woman at a laundromat flashed through my mind. She has the intel. Itachi's voice became sharper and harder. "Yuhi Kurenai? She was your handler for the mission?" Itachi had always had a sharp mind. "I'm sorry, Itachi," he finally said, his voice becoming progressively softer as he tried to stay on the line long enough. "For leaving you. Like, Thesa." Shisui could hardly feel the tears streaming down his cheeks from Itachi's. "It's alright," expressed Itachi. "It's alright, just hang on for me, okay? We're on our way to the hospital, just hang on, damn it. Don't leave me." For the final time, Shisui grinned. With the morning light of dawn creating playful shadows on the rice paper screens, it was officially the start of another day in the Uchiha compound. With gentle, cautious steps, Makoto entered the main hall while holding a bag full of sharpening stones in her other hand and a basket of old, dull kunai against her hip. Dark heads tilted up at her entrance, and innumerable pairs of steady black eyes flicked up to meet hers, creating a subtle ripple in the room. Uchiha's eyes. Makoto gave a single nod, and everyone turned their heads back down as the incessant hum of scraping metal continued unabated, interrupted only by the abrupt, sharp cries of a hungry baby demanding food. The low, mocking voice said, "Sister, dear, it looks as if you've brought the entire armory with you," and Makoto's mouth curled into a tiny smile. Makoto said, "Not quite," her gaze darting to the basket her sister was holding against her chest, which was almost exactly like her own, "as much as you, I think, Kyoko." If Kyoko's smile was a little strained, Makoto could only assume it was no worse than her own. Kyoko returned the smile with regret. I've been putting it off, she stated plainly, for a day like this. Makoto glanced across the hall, where grandmothers stitched layers of silk steel into armor with only a single string of chakra and the Sharingan shining in their eyes. Mothers expertly sharpened kunai with deft hands, and babies were strapped to their backs. The women's voices were cool and low as they talked about the weather, the kids, anything other than the tight tension that pervaded the room and the teetering calm that was on the verge of breaking at any second. Shall we sit? There's still some room by the doors to the garden, Kyoko replied. She pointed to the rice paper screens that were tucked away to let in the morning light on the eastern side of the hall. Makoto nodded and trailed behind her sister, moving past groups of women whose chakra signatures flickered in silent support of hers. In their dark, glittering eyes, which were strikingly similar to her own, Makoto read, "We know, we know, we know," similar to Sasuke's. Makoto had no choice but to turn away and stare steadily at her sister's shadow until they were on the other side. The wild dark curls of hair that escaped from the unkempt bun on top of her head and fell in her eyes were impatiently brushed aside as Kyoko settled herself onto a plush cushion. "One of these days, I'm definitely going to cut it," Makoto absently remarked. "You've been saying that since you were 7, while using one hand to retrieve a stone from the cloth bag and the other to pick up a kunai." With the handle still dripping with oil, she held it up to the light and saw the deep nicks running down the middle. While sorting through his hamper the other day and selecting all the blood-stained clothing to be washed separately, she discovered one of Itachi's. Kyoko laughed, as though she didn't fully believe herself either. "I'm really going to do it this time," she said. She was working on sharpening the edge of a dagger that was already wickedly sharp. "And did you know, Shisui's been saying he wants to grow it out too, as if his hair doesn't give him enough trouble as it is." If Makoto hadn't experienced the same hitch in her throat whenever she thought of her own boys, she would never have noticed the faint, nearly imperceptible hitch that followed Shisui's name. Makoto cleared her throat and remarked, "He'd look good with long hair. Itachi's had his hair long for years now. I barely remember what he looked like when it was still short." The conversation abruptly stalled out, and both of them fell silent. The gray hairs running through Kyoko's hair and the wrinkles of crow's feet at the corners of her eyes caught Makoto's attention as she glanced over at her round face. Makoto wondered how it had come to this, how the two of them sat in silence while sending their boys to fight in pointless, never-ending wars and then waiting to lose them. Sasuke vanished about a month ago. Shisui disappeared into the shadows 3 weeks ago, wearing a mask without a face. Itachi put on his bone-white armor last night, draped his black Anbu cloak over his shoulders, and crept out of the windows into the darkness, trailing the messenger hawk's dark, fluttering wings. The elders would make their final decision today. Fugaku was left sitting by himself at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a scroll bound with blood that demanded fire and strength and another pointless, never-ending war to fill with the blood of the Uchiha children. Makoto closed her eyes and took a deep breath, allowing the fatigue to envelop her in oppressive waves. Another day, another breath, Anothera. As soon as the chakra flared, it was bright and wild, and everyone in the room stood up at once, blades in hand. Intent to defend, protect, and kill swelled up in the room as Sharingan's tomos swirled in soft, round faces and harsh, wrinkled ones. The last to stand, Makoto did so slowly while clutching Itachi's partially sharpened kunai. It couldn't have happened, could it? Fugaku's chakra signature flared once more, and the rice screen that led to the entrance abruptly tore open with such force that the paper was torn. Fugaku's gaunt face remained fixed as he staggered through. The room started to gently spin around Makoto as her heart tightened and she felt the bile rise in her throat. "They found him. He's alive. He's in the hospital." With a dull thunk, Itachi's ancient kunai fell onto the tatami mats. Unseeing, Makoto glanced down at her hands. "He's still alive. He's still Olivia." A warm arm encircled her shoulders, and Makoto looked up when had she fallen to the ground. She wondered distantly to see Fugaku standing over his shoulder, tears streaming silently down his face in echo, and Itachi's bloodied face looking down at her weary. Softly, "I'm sorry, mother," he said. With his entire body shaking, he closed his eyes and said, "I'm sorry you had to wait so long. I couldn't even get Danzo, he'd disappeared by the time we got there." Makoto held up a trembling hand to dab at the tears that were slowly trickling down his nose and darkening the front of her apron, leaving behind damp, spherical patches. "My dear, dear boy," she sobbed while embracing him. Still wearing armor and smelling of blood and sweat and life, her boys were still Olivia. Itachi gave her a tight hug in return. Inexplicably, after a long moment, Itachi moved away from her hug with a characteristic clink. Makoto watched in disbelief as Itachi turned to face Kyoko, her sister's expression reflecting her own confusion. Fugaku's body exuded a comforting, familiar warmth as he lowered his head and placed his hand gently on Makoto's shoulder. Itachi said, "Aunt Kyoko," with a deep bow, too deeply. Kyoko's face went completely still, the confusion settling into emptiness, and she blinked slowly. Slowly, Itachi said, "He saved Sasuke's life," and the tense, teetering tension that pervaded the room broke. Itachi extended both of his shabby hands, revealing Shisui's dog tags as the fingers unfolded. All was quiet in the room, save for the faint drip, 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 which Makoto gradually recognized as the sound of blood slowly dripping onto the tatami mats. The blood of her sister. The dagger she had been working on was still in her hand, its freshly sharpened edge piercing the meaty flesh of her palm. Itachi cried, "I'm sorry," as Kyoko's blood soaked the floor and her eyes flashed from red to black and back again through glistening tears. The birds outside started to move. As Fugaku stopped, 6 Anbu guards stood by the ward's entrance, their masked faces expressionless. "Identification," said the one wearing captain's white and wearing the tiger mask. Silently, he opened a black scroll he was holding. Biting his thumb, Fugaku pressed his bloody thumbprint onto the thin black rice paper, causing it to flare bright blue for a moment before going away. With a nod, the Anbu agent moved aside, allowing Fugaku and Fugaku alone to pass through the doors. He knew Makoto was going through the same thing behind him, but the doors behind him swung shut, instantly cutting off all sound. Another set of double doors without hinges or handles was in front of him. Fugaku saw the incredibly intricate seal mechanisms pulsing with chakra on the walls of the tiny vestibule as he blinked once, allowing the Sharingan to bleed through his eyes. Fugaku felt something quite cold sink deep in his chakra coils as they flared 3 times in quick succession. The sensation vanished as fast as it had appeared. As if in response to some invisible cue, the doors in front of him silently swung inward, and Fugaku entered Konoha General's S-Class ward. A medic with a clipboard in hand was waiting by the hallway, writing something down. Dark circles were even more noticeable under the harsh fluorescent lighting, and her head jerked up as Fugaku drew closer. "Uchiha Fugaku." "Dono," she said sternly, glancing at him with her icy white eyes and slightly straightening her back. Fugaku said, "Hyuga. Sensei," in a somewhat warm tone. The doors behind him swung open once more, and Makoto stepped behind him, her pale face visible. When she saw the Hyuga medic, her eyes widened just a little before she bowed her head courteously. "Sensei," she whispered. "Uchiha." "Dono, Hyuga," Sensei said back, tilting her head just a little bit. "Welcome. I trust you've both passed through the cleansing safely?" "The seals?" inquired Fugaku. "Hyuga." Sensei gave a nod. She explained that, "They're designed to strip you of any external chakra devices like scrolls or bombs and kill electrical devices like radios or even watches, before heading down the long, endless hallway with doors that were completely unmarked, unremarkable, and devoid of any signs." At erratic intervals, corridors that were identical in appearance split off from the main hallway. "Hyuga." Sensei confidently strode ahead, but Fugaku closely monitored every move she made because he knew Makoto followed suit at his side. "As I'm sure you'll understand," she said dryly, "security precautions." Fugaku moaned as he considered Danzu's abrupt absence. Somewhere out there, the bastard was undoubtedly thirsty for retribution. With a silent curse, Fugaku almost ran into her back as she stopped suddenly in front of a blank door. He said, "This one, Hyuga. Sensei, he's in here." After making a single, forceful knock, "Hyuga." Sensei flattened her palm against the door's surface. Before it silently swung open and revealed one very small boy sleeping in one very large hospital bed, it rippled for a moment, taking on the shape of her handprint. All of a sudden, Fugaku was speechless. With a soft gasp, Makoto slipped past Fugaku's motionless body and hurried into the room. Itachi, who was seated in a folding chair beside the bed, got up slowly and, unusually, blinked back a long yawn. He bowed stiffly. Mother, father, and Fugaku wondered if Itachi had slept at all since the Hokage's hawk had come for him the night before. As he pushed himself into the room and made his way to his oldest son, the thought restored his strength. Itachi said, "Father," as his eyes widened, "Are you?" Fugaku placed his chin on top of Itachi's head and tightly hugged him around the shoulders. How long before he was unable to do this anymore? Fugaku tightened his grip. He said, "You did well, my son," and felt Itachi tense up in his embrace. Itachi stifled, his breath hot against Fugaku's stiff kimono top's silk. He repeatedly said, I'm sorry," in a strained, dejected tone. It wasn't enough, I couldn't save him. Fugaku pulled away abruptly, staring down at Itachi's exhausted, heartbroken face. Quietly, he said, don't disparage his decision. But, as he uttered Sasuke's name, Fugaku couldn't help but sound weak. Shisui gave his life to save Sasuke's, he said. He chose to do so and I grieve for it every moment of the day. But I respect it. No one forced his hand. He sacrificed himself of his own free will, for Sasuke, and for you. Itachi's eyes flashed once more, turning from black to red, and Fugaku briefly saw what looked like pinwheels before his gaze returned to normal. Fugaku's damned voice choked up again, and he was forced to turn away when he saw Sasuke's serenely sleeping face. And that too doesn't mean you didn't do enough. The two of you gave so much. Oh no, go to hell with it all. Fugaku tensed as he felt Itachi's arms slowly encircle his waist and give him a hug in return, pressing his head against Fugaku's chest like a child again. With gradual relaxation, Fugaku put his hand on the back of Itachi's neck and returned the embrace. With one hand clenched tightly around Sasuke's limp wrist, Mikoto gazed up at him with teary eyes. If Fugaku had been a lesser man, he would have recoiled when Hyuga Sensei said, "We've put him in an induced healing coma," from behind him. Rather, he looked at the medic coolly and turned his head to the side. Explain. To put it simply, he's been through some extreme stress these past few weeks. His body needs to heal and so does his mind. Once we finish evaluating and treating his physical state, we'll begin exploring his mental state with Yamanaka Sensei. Hyuga Sensei cocked her head and crossed. After a lengthy silence, Mikoto asked softly, her gaze never leaving Sasuke's face, will he be alright? Hyuga Sensei's white eyes were unreadable as she blinked and hesitated. She said, I can't promise anything, with caution, but... Mikoto repeated, her voice a little louder, but... He's a Uchiha, said Hyuga Sensei with a flimsy smile. I highly suspect he'll pull through well enough. With one trembling hand still around Itachi, Fugaku reached out and brushed a curl of Sasuke's hair back, the bandage around his head contrasting sharply with the pallor of his skin. Sasuke's chest rose and fell with each breath, and his eyes fluttered with the movement. Alive. In the present and the near future, Fugaku followed Sasuke's breathing and the quiet flicker of his undeveloped chakra signature as he allowed the Sharingan to bleed through his eyes. In every moment, alive, alive, alive. Before the door opened and another medic with long yellow hair in a bun appeared, there was a brief knock and the same ripple as before. An Anbu agent, the same one wearing the tiger mask to guard the ward's entrance, stood at his sides. Sharply, Yamanaka Sensei, said Hyuga Sensei. It was profoundly insincere because Yamanaka appeared as contrite as a Yamanaka could appear. Sorry, Hidoka-san, but he insisted. Tiger Mask bowed his head. My apologies, he said in a tone that was completely bland and somewhat muffled behind the mask. But the Hokage insists. Tiger Mask persisted just as Fugaku opened his mouth to tell the Anbu agent where the Hokage could conceal his message. A tribunal has been called. The Hokage requests and requires the full presence of the council. With a sharp click, Fugaku closed his mouth. With a ripple of intent in his chakra signature, Itachi moved away from Fugaku and toward the Anbu agent. On what matter? Itachi questioned sharply, his body tensing up as though he were flinching away from a blow. On the matter of high treason, murder, and the endangerment of Konoha citizens committed by Shimura Danzo, he will be judged in absentia. Deep beneath the mountain was a room with walls composed entirely of living wood, each plank, fiber, and cell pulsing with chakra. The Shodai had constructed the room himself, using his own hands to bring dust to life and fill the void with an unlikely, impossible living thing that would never be exposed to sunlight. When it came time to fortify the seal holding the Kyuubi, the Sandaime took a seat at the head of the long table that now occupied the entire space of the room the Shodai had constructed for Uzumaki Mito. There was strength, clarity, and above all, secrecy in the walls. As Anbu agents led each council member into the room one by one, the room gradually filled up until all but two of the seats at the table were occupied. Danzu's and Hitaki's. With his hands folded together on his lap, the Sandaime said solemnly, I appreciate your attendance this evening. As many of you may recall, this is the first tribunal called since the matter of Orochimaru 10 years ago. Members of the council and clan heads moved around in their chairs as the awkward tension in the room increased. We are here today to pass judgment on the matter of Shimura Danzu's treason against the village hidden in the leaves, as well his murder and endangerment of protected Konoha citizens, in absentia. If there are any objections, state them now. There was a dead silence in the room. Nobody in the group stirred. The Sandame pointed to Homura, who gave him a very displeased look before clearing his throat and reading aloud from the scroll that materialized in front of him. Very well. We will begin with the full list of charges. The Sandame reclined in his chair, observing the motionless faces in front of him as they observed him. Shikaku raised a small eyebrow, but the Sandame carefully chose not to answer. A silently helpful Anbu guard standing behind his chair gave Homura a long drink of water and a cough before he finished. One was placed in a ready position behind each chair. Objections? None existed. The Sandame said, "Very well," and nodded. The Anbu guard behind his own chair moved forward with a bundle of scrolls she put on the table after he made a subtle gesture that said, "Then we will move forward to the evidence." The first exhibit. Years and years and years ago, shortly after that final tribunal in this room, the Sandame presented the first piece of evidence he had ever obtained. The Sandame tapped the first scroll and said softly, "These are reports detailing the inventory of Orochimaru's hidden laboratory in the sewers." There were duplicates in front of each seat, each certified as a genuine copy by a glowing chakra number. As clan heads and council members unsealed the scrolls with bloody thumbprints, there was a rustle of paper. Evidence that Danzo deliberately falsified the reports and hid a large amount of illegal laboratory equipment and the results of Orochimaru's experiments for his own purposes. And so it continued. Fabricated orphanage death certificates in order to enlist kids for his cause. Money taken out of the Orphans and Widows Trust to purchase equipment and tools. The conversion of Orochimaru's former laboratory into what seemed to be Danzo's headquarters, tucked away in the sewers, far from the roots of the ancient trees that supported Konoha. Root headquarters. Recalling Shisui's last pledge, the Sandame hand hesitated over a single scroll. "Either way, I'm going to end this." So he had, the Sandame reflected sorrowfully. "This report is compiled by intelligence gathered by a special operative who infiltrated Root," the Sandame said. "Shisui collected it, and Kurenai put it all together in a logical report that described the movements of Root, its base of operations, its size, safe houses, the educational facilities that trained the young Root recruits, and the weapons caches that were spread throughout the village and beyond. Which leads us to this final, precipitating event. The final scroll was drawn in the Sandame's direction. He opened it and wiped the flat rice paper with his bloody thumb once more. A tiny white plastic box with a standard containment seal appeared on the table, and a puff of displaced astral smoke was heard. The temperature was oddly chilly. The Sandame saw Fugaku close his eyes and take a deep, shaky breath. He touched it with his finger, and it opened. The box revealed a tiny piece of shriveled flesh, and plumes of condensation rose in the air. A tiny child's ear, still moist from the clotted blood, was in perfect condition because it had only been there a few weeks before. Uchiha Sasuke disappeared 3 weeks and 4 days ago. This parcel was delivered to Uchiha Fugaku's house the night of. It is confirmed to be Sasuke's ear, thanks to independent genetic testing performed by an impartial third party, Sandame quietly announced. Uchiha Sasuke was rescued last night, along with 35 other individuals, all under the age of 10, in Root's care. Shimura Danzo was found on site, intending on re-educating the children with the use of Yamanaka techniques. Inoichi appeared ill at the far end of the table, and everyone in the room mirrored his expression to varying degrees, with the exception of Fugaku, who had a lifeless face and eyes that were blindingly angry, as the Sandame knew. As of 10 minutes ago, Shimura Danzo is still missing after operations engaged him, killing one and wounding several others. Since then, you may have noticed that I have put the village on high alert, with the walls at double strength and no entry or exit allowed except in cases of emergency. After examining every person in the room, the Sandame paused, took a deep breath, and exhaled it. "I think Danzo is our biggest threat to stability and peace since the release of the Kyuubi almost 7 years ago. So I think we've reached a conclusion. We will proceed to the last discussion if there are no objections." 20. 5 Anbu operatives sprang into action, 2 of them immediately moving in to cover the Hokage, while 3 swords unsheathed like quicksilver as the room's ceiling literally tore open, shredding wood, chakra, and living plants amid plumes of chakra lightning and smoke. The scream was so loud that it was deafening. After the dust storm passed, Hitaki Kakashi stood in the center of the table, smelling of ozone and dust, and he casually ignored the 3 swords aimed at his throat while sparks of lightning continued to dance around his fists. "Sorry, I'm late," he replied. "But as the clan head of the Hitaki, I would like to register my objection and submit one last piece of evidence, if I may, Sandame Sama." The Anbu guards hovering over him were gently pushed aside by the Sandame, who said, "You may, Hitaki." Dono. Wearing what appeared to be new, but borrowed, Junin blues, a bit short at the wrist, exposing a strip of pale white skin, Kakashi took a scroll out of his flak vest. The scroll unrolled all the way across the table and came to a halt in front of the Sandame after he flung it down onto it like a whip. The Sandame found himself looking down at what appeared to be Gari of Iwa's head, permanently removed from his body, after a final puff of smoke cleared the air. "Release," Kakashi said icily. "I want to add something to the charges list." Kakashi, looking extremely bored and with his hands stuffed in his pockets, reeled off, as evidenced by Gari's head, which he personally ordered me to acquire and which can be independently confirmed by his servant, Yakushi Kabuto, held in the Sannin Jiraiya's custody. Shimura Danzo illegally misappropriated Anbu resources for his own gains, resulting in the violation of several inter-village peace treaties, as well as severe harm and death to loyal Konoha shinobi. The room suddenly dropped 15 degrees as Kakashi growled, "Now, tell me where he is so I can fucking kill him." The first person brave enough or maybe stupid enough to break the silence was Sume, who smiled wolfishly and said, "Well, aren't you an overdramatic lil whelp? You ever heard of something called a door?" Kuromaru's raised hackles, his canines bared for battle, were the only indication that she was uncomfortable, as she appeared completely unaffected by the oppressive cold. Sume tapped a fingertip with a claw on the table, which was covered in dust, ash, and the remains of the ceiling, saying, "But you make a good point. I move to recognize Hitaki Dono's motion to sentence the traitor Shimura Danzo to death. A simple statement of the truth, a kiss on the forehead, or a knife to the heart could change the world's equilibrium." Anbu agents slickly sheathed their weapons and repositioned themselves as if Hitaki Kakashi hadn't literally crashed the tribunal. The Sandame made a small, silent gesture with his hand, and the array of swords vanished in a flurry. "Motion recognized," said the Sandame, "and seconding motions?" Fugaku's head came up. He said, "I second," in a firm, if hoarse, voice, as though he had already yelled it out loud in his own mind. The room then filled with echoes of the same two words, "I second, I second, I second," until the final person spoke, as though responding to some unspoken cue. With his head bent over his clasped hands, Homura remained silent for a considerable amount of time. "He only ever thought about the village," Homura finally uttered, his speech sluggish and shaky. "He only ever thought of his duty to us all." A long time ago, during the First War, the Sandame remembered a time when they had all gathered together on a chilly winter night to share cold, wet meal rations and warm their fingers with licks of tame chakra fire. Danzo sat by himself, his hands clasped around his sword's hilt, watching and waiting, protecting them all from the enemy that lurked in the shadows beyond. Danzo had never left that night, the Sandame reflected, in a way. "I know," said the Sandame softly, "but that does not mean his actions have not caused us all great harm. I can understand, but I cannot forgive. Not in this." Homura's deep-set eyes glistened behind his glasses as he looked up. Finally, the truth was revealed, expressed simply, "I second." "It is unanimous," explained the Sandame. "We hereby pass judgment upon Shimura Danzo, in absentia, and find him guilty on all accounts. He is to be sentenced to death, effective immediately." The Sandame stopped and looked up into Kakashi's unblinking, flat eyes. As the tribunal drew to a close around him, he remained standing unruffled amid all the debris. "Hitaki Dono, are you willing to bear the responsibility to carry out this charge?" The Sandame recognized the thin, humorless smile on Kakashi's face, but it was hidden by the shifting mask. "I thought you'd never ask, Hokage-sama." A toad was waiting on the Hokage's desk, idly resting on a pile of documents. His bulging eyes were rolling in deep satisfaction as he worked on using the pencil's pointy end as a toothpick. Kakashi stood loosely in a ready position and said, "So you did receive Jiraiya's message," while the Hokage sat down in his chair and adjusted his bulky red and white robes. "A message, yes, if you could even call it that. He said that he had collected additional evidence regarding Danzo and mentioned that you were somehow involved. I put two and two together, but somehow, it didn't quite involve you." The Sandame took a breath. "I was, perhaps, a little over-enthusiastic about my entrance," Kakashi uttered in a dull voice. Kakashi decided to ignore the Sandame's glance at him. Quietly, Kakashi questioned, "Would you have received your unanimous vote if I hadn't entered as I did?" After hesitating, the Sandame shook his head. "Perhaps, perhaps not. Nevertheless, how did you?" The door, which had not existed just a few moments before, was knocked on. A muffled, "Excuse me," was heard, and the door opened to reveal Tenzu's weary but resolute face. Tenzo resolutely said, "I apologize for the intrusion, Hokage." Sama, and entered the room, the door disappearing behind him to reveal the plain, unmarked wall once more. Your guards refused to let me through, but I had to get in anyway to stop Kakashi Senpai from doing something stupid again. Ah, the Hokage said, his face lighting up with realization. Tenzo, did you, perhaps? Tenzo, so irritated that all of his natural deference had been drained from him, claimed, I didn't know he was going to break the secret room when I told him where it was. He said it was an emergency and he had to talk to you and the council right away about something involving Danzo. He'll be happy to fix it, Kakashi said, cutting through Tenzu's angry glare. You have my thanks, Tenzo-kun, the Hokage said solemnly. Tenzo ducked his head, murmuring something about it being an honor to be of service, and instantly colored, as if suddenly remembering what specific company he was in. As he turned back to face the Hokage, Kakashi felt time passing slowly and relentlessly, like water passing through the spaces between his fingers. But he added, nevertheless, you gave me this responsibility, to the Hokage's previous statement. We're wasting time we don't have. Let me carry it out. I will give you his head, like I did Gaari's. The Sandame's deep craggy face was unreadable as he stared at him steadily for a long time. Very well. I will grant you whatever resources you require. A team, perhaps. I don't. It would be beneficial to have an additional tracker, Tenzo said abruptly. He still had a flaming red face. He continued briskly, ticking off the lengthy list of supplies he needed. And of course we need to restock our supplies. I only managed to grab the bare minimum from the outpost before leaving for Konoha, he said. You don't have to save the world by yourself or figure out every problem. Cooperation. As he turned his face away to look into the Hokage's amused eyes, Kakashi was never more appreciative of his mask than he was at that precise moment. The Hokage said, I'll send word to Inuzuka. Dono, after Tenzo had finally lost his temper and he started to notice that Kakashi had not yet raised any objections to his involvement. I'm sure she would be more than happy to contribute to your efforts. Kakashi looked up at the wall clock, the second hand ticking steadily, and said, tell her to move quickly. I want to be out in the field by the end of the hour. Yes, of course. A knock on the official double doors leading into the office interrupted the Hokage once more. He raised a hand in a quick motion, the doors opening on their own, and he appeared momentarily agitated, his brow deeply furrowed. Kakashi saw the Hokage's face go blank as the doors opened to reveal a single, thin figure dressed in a worn flak vest and Junin blues rather than the customary silk kimono. Silver combs in the shape of fans were used to neatly pin back her hair. My apologies, Hokage. Sama, Uchiha Mikoto said with a courteous bow. Two Anbu guards hovered behind her slight shoulders, their porcelain masks somehow projecting a deep sense of embarrassment. But I thought I would offer my assistance as well. There was silence for a long time. Finally, Kakashi broke the silence by saying, you understand the risks, there was no question. When Mikoto raised her head, her eyes briefly flashed red. Kakashi managed to capture 3 complete swirling tomo before they vanished into darkness. Simply, I am owed, she stated. They started with the deserted sanitary facility, its perimeter surrounded by a series of red seal tags designating it as a scene being investigated by the authorities. With a luminous blue hand, Kakashi raised the barrier and pointed ahead. Mikoto barely had to duck her head as she stepped under with grace. Inuzuka Rinko trailed behind, exposing one dog in silent recognition as she went past Kakashi, her enormous, severely scarred bloodhound pressing closely behind her. Tenzo completed them by switching from his typical Anbu uniform to blues and a flak vest that still had a stiff appearance from long, wretched missions in terrible weather. He ducked beneath the swinging seal tags, one of them briefly brushing his hair as he tugged at the collar of his vest. His hackles stood up in sudden surprise as he hissed. Under his mask, Kakashi grinned and remarked, the pain is supposed to be a deterrent for the nosy, he added, sorry, a little too earnestly. Kakashi was greatly encouraged by Tenzu's withering gaze, but he remained silent as he followed Rinko and Mikoto. With cracks slicing through the ceiling and walls, the building was in danger of collapsing and was only kept intact by shoddy seals and hastily applied earth jutsu. After turning on her flashlight, Mikoto moved forward to take a closer look. She noted, this isn't from a lack of maintenance, the Sharingan contrasting sharply with her white, glowing face. I can see remnants of chakra workings that caused these stress fractures. These look similar to those set off by a triggered explosion. Place still reeks of chakra too, Rinko remarked, stooping to sniff at a harmless heap of debris on the ground with her ninkin. The stench of chakra fire was still overpowering, the walls were streaked with soot, and the air was still heavy with the lingering smell of smoke and dust. For a moment, Kakashi remembered his childhood in the trenches. This was a bit like the smell of the war. Kakashi remarked, "I assume you've read the reports," and waited for Rinko to gather herself before they proceeded down the corridor toward the stairwell at the end. Danzo repurposed this facility for Root's use, mainly for training and testing. It has easy access to the sewers, considering its original purpose, and far from notice given its location on the fringes of the village. The perfect location to secretly educate children and mold their minds for his needs. A yellow warning sign was plastered above the door leading to the stairs, which was propped open with a heavy cinder block. Yesterday, Danzo attempted to do so, but was stopped by Uchiha Shisui. This is his last known location before he disappeared, just as reinforcement arrived on scene. Tenzo switched on his own flashlight and pointed it into the shadowy recesses of the stairs, where he saw a rat's curving tail as it fled from the unexpected light. "Well," Rinko uttered, her tone abruptly rough. She was the first to go out with her ninkin, Tenzo trailing behind, his hands poised to summon wood at any time. "I'll take point." Makoto slumped her shoulders and hung back. Before she clenched them into fists, her hands were shaking. Saying quietly, "You don't have to do this," Kakashi said. Makoto's hard black eyes were wet and glistening with unshed tears as she looked up at him. "I might have overestimated myself. Control," she muttered. Kakashi gradually realized that Makoto was angry rather than scared. She took a deep breath, and her face fell into a chilly, vacant void as she released it. "My apologies. I won't let it happen again." Kakashi reminded himself gently, beneath the underneath. As he said, "We'll find him," he felt his own anger rise in his chest like tendrils. "I promise." They looked at each other with perfect understanding. Tenzo yelled, "Captain Kakashi!" "Senpai," from below, his voice strangely resonating off the walls. "I think you'll want to see this." Kakashi could see how the basement would have functioned as a laboratory beneath the debris and wreckage, with thick coils of cables that could channel electricity and chakra, and rows of glistening white surgical tables. Probably Sasuke had slept on one of those tables. The sight of the equipment crumpled and dented beyond use gave Kakashi a kind of twisted pleasure. Broken pieces of the glass window crunched beneath Kakashi's sandals and littered the ground, and above that was an observatory that probably allowed Danzo to watch the action. Without a chakra construct to nourish and maintain it, the crumbling remnant of a massive earthen dome circled the tables, vanishing into dust. After the original ninja died, very few chakra workings survived. Tenzo was standing at one table, the only one with blood splatters on it. With her arms folded across her chest, Rinko stood beside him. With an expectant expression, her ninkin sat beside her. Tenzo stated, "We found Sasuke's table," with a reserved expression. Kakashi asked sharply, "The blood?" Makoto's deliberate silence beside him conveyed more than any flinch or horrified gasp. "Uchiha Shisui's," Rinko uttered, rapidly shaking her head. Makoto stated, "Preliminary reports indicated that Shisui was stabbed in the chest while guarding Sasuke," and Kakashi realized that she was probably alluding to a discussion she had with Itachi, who had been in charge of the reinforcements. After a brief pause, she added, "He was also blinded." Kakashi stopped suddenly. He demanded, "Blinded? By Danzo?" Makoto shook her head, her face briefly tinged with uncertainty. "His autopsy is still in progress, but judging by the angle of the cut, the medics think that it was self-inflicted." "I can heal them," he replied, "in exchange for your Sharingan." Kakashi was aware of Danzo's obsession with the Sharingan from Kabuto. Envious of the strength and leverage it provided the Uchiha clan, he yearned to have it for his own ends. Could it be that Shisui used his only weapon to stop Danzo when he tried to harvest his own eyes in a desperate attempt? Suppressing the urge to reach up and press a hand again on Obito's aching eye, Kakashi swallowed hard. "Finally, I see," he said. Rinko's eyes were sharp as she closely examined Kakashi's face. "Tenkin's scented Shimura Danzo here too," she said. She jerked a hand over to the back of the room, where two massive generators sat by an elaborate inlay of pipework, and said, "The trail stops and disappears, but Tenkin picked it back up again by the back of the room, by the generators. Looks like there's some kind of exit to a sewage line." Tenzo growled, "We have Anbu searching through all the sewers," in a stern tone, "and Uchiha police stationed at nearly every entry point. I don't understand how he still hasn't been caught." "Root," said Kakashi, "hides in the shadows. He likely has double agents planted within the ranks, and doubtless, he's found some other concealed exit point. Given that his cover had been blown, the village was pursuing him, and he was running low on supplies. Danzo must be in pain. Where would a murderous psychopath who has nothing left to lose and grandiose delusions run to? What would he do, then?" The most dangerous of all was probably a wounded snake that backed into the corner. We'll follow his trail. He won't leave the village, it's too important to him. If he left Konoha, it would just underscore how much legitimacy and power he's lost. Rinko, can Tankan track over water as well? I've been doing this longer than you've been alive, whelp, Rinko said calmly. Tankan tracks chakra. Unless Danzu's dead or has some serious Sanin level suppression seals on, he can run all he wants. We'll find him. All right, then. Kakashi gave a sharp nod. Kabuto proved to be a surprising resource. I have my own map of hidden route safehouses overlaid over the sewer lines. We'll cross. Reference it against the trail in the sewers in. There was a sharp pop and a puff of astral smoke, due to the quick displacement of air. A squat orange frog clutching its webbed hands was visible when the smoke cleared. Oh, thank the sage, I finally found you. I've been popping all over the place. Fear gathered in Kakashi's abdomen. Jiraiya? The frog gave a headshake. Danzu's taken over Uchiha police headquarters and holding everyone in their hostage. Finally, the venom, dripping fangs of the injured snake struck. Located in a building shared by the main clan hall, clan archives, and the compound infirmary, the Uchiha police headquarters was situated in the center of the Uchiha compound. Every day, hundreds of Konoha residents of both Uchiha and non-Uchiha passed through the building. The number of people trapped behind the building's enormous four walls was too great for Kakashi to even begin to calculate. Tens of Uchiha officers, civilians, children. The area was completely devoid of onlookers and ninjas, and it was marked off with a recognizable string of red seal tags. On the roofs of nearby residences, Enbu and Junin stood ready to engage at the first sign. A statue of Amaterasu, the Hokage, standing beside him in what looked to be his black battle armor, Jiraiya, was waiting for him. Jiraiya said, Kakashi, Uchiha-san, and nodded. Makoto gave a rigid nod in return. My children? Safe, said the Hokage softly. Itachi is standing guard over Sasuke. I've assigned Beta Squad for their protection. However, I'm afraid Fugaku-isa. For a brief moment, Makoto's white face wavered, displaying an agony that deeply affected Kakashi. I expected as much, she uttered in a low voice. He would have been in his office. Somehow, Danzo managed to plant a few agents. Well, 4 to be exact, and had this barrier up and running by the time anyone knew what was going on. It's a 4 violent flames barrier, Kakashi interrupted somberly, recalling how Orochimaru had used it during the invasion. Seeing the Hokage on this side, wearing the same armor in which he died, was particularly startling. It was as though the ghosts of his past were resurrecting to haunt him. Jiraiya gave him a look. He swore, how did you Oh, never mind, though. What's important is that he managed to lace the building up with explosives and threatens to blow the whole thing up if we even attempt to step near the barrier. He's been communicating through sound jutsu, projecting his was 10 minutes ago and not a peep out of him since then. It's likely that all the root operatives he has left are stationed inside that building, in order to secure the hostages and force Fugaku Dono's obedience, the Hokage was thinking. Makoto said, I don't understand, as her eyes shifted to the glistening seal barrier. What does he want? Has he made any demands? No, Jiraiya said with a headshake, just voiced his warnings. There was silence for a long time. I can heal them, he replied, in exchange for your Sharingan. Kabuto had demanded his Sharingan all the way to Earth Country. Shisui had caused his own blindness. They had taken Sasuke away. Slowly and distantly, Kakashi said, it doesn't matter, as the pieces started to come together. None of this matters. Makoto's black eyes were leaking red as she stared at him. What does that mean? Danzo has nothing left to lose and one thing he wants more than anything in the world. They're not hostages, they're assets. He's going to harvest every Sharingan he can get. Bile rose in Kakashi's throat, making him feel ill. He kept thinking of Rin bending over him with soft, glowing green hands, crushing Obito's face. She had whispered, I'll be quick, I promise it won't hurt a bit. We have to get in there. We have to stop him before he murders everyone in the building. Makoto gazed up at him, Tomo swirling in a mesmerizing pattern, the Sharingan ablaze with a raging red fire. With an unexpectedly steady and calm voice, she asked him, You're sure of this? It was possible that he was mistaken. Kakashi fervently hoped he was mistaken. Yes, he said, his tongue feeling like it was covered in dust and ash. Yes, I'm sure. Makoto's eyes appeared to shift inward, and the only movement she made was the languid spin of her Sharingan. All right, she muttered, so softly that Kakashi was certain she was speaking to herself alone. Finally, her blood-red eyes, starting to well up with tears, looked up at him. "I'm so sorry, Kakashi, but I have no choice." In one motion, she lifted her hand. Kakashi lost all knowledge when the chakra suddenly flared brightly. The first thing Kakashi noticed was that Obito's eye no longer had the familiar weight over it, and his forehead protector was gone. Had he returned to the hospital? He checked his reserves slowly. He was surprisingly close to full strength. What had taken place? Mikoto said, "I know how valuable Hitaki Kakashi is to you," bringing back a wave of memories. The hostage situation, the search for Danzo, and Mikoto's tears as she used genjutsu on him. Restraints tightened around Kakashi's wrists and legs, and ropes around his chest secured him to a rigid wooden chair. To maintain the appearance that he was still unconscious, he kept his eyes tightly shut. In a calm, collected tone, Mikoto said, "He's the only living example of a successful Sharingan transplantation in a non-Uchiha." It sounded like any other conversation. Danzu's typically low voice became high and reedy as he asked, "So you think you can bargain one life for hundreds?" It was the voice of a man who had reached his breaking point. He's not that valuable of a resource. A hold off. Kakashi opened his eyes slightly and looked around the room through his eyelashes. With her back to him, Mikoto stood in front of him and slightly off to the side. Danzo held a knife to a man's bare throat as he stood across the room, behind what appeared to be an office desk. The exposed throat of Fugaku. Fugaku's office was here. Danzo stood behind him, seemingly using Fugaku as a shield against Mikoto's unblinking gaze, while he sat in his desk chair, his eyes blindfolded and his mouth tightly gagged. From the kunai's handle, Kakashi noticed a tiny, white object fluttering. A white seal tag full of repressed power. As familiar to Kakashi as the weight of lightning in his palm or the handle of a knife in his hand, the swirling curves of the seals were visible from the other side of the room. It was a chakra bomb detonator, ready to go off with a chakra spark. Mikoto said, "I don't care about everyone else," and in that icy, arrogant tone, Kakashi heard Sasuke's own voice, 10 years later, curse the village's name. "I'll give you him for my husband. You can do as you like with the rest." "You love him?" Danzu's expression showed his incredulity, and Kakashi became increasingly horrified when he saw that the bandages covering his eye had been taken off, exposing a huge hole where an eye should be. The hole was filled with old scar tissue and what looked like a wriggling mass of seals that preserved the eye socket so that a new eye could be transplanted. A Sharingan. Behind her back, Mikoto's fisted hand curled into a V-shape that swept downward. "He's my husband. I don't expect you to understand, only consider what I'm offering. Will you agree or not?" she said. Ambush. It all fell into place. Naturally, he had been taken hostage by Mikoto, who had used him as leverage to break through the barrier that was impenetrable by chakra and strength, in order to enter Danzo. Desperately, Kakashi made a list of his assets. His fingers were knotted into impossibility, and he was too tightly bound. He lost his summoning scrolls, his kunai, and his concealed knives. All he had left was the Eye of Obito. Danzo grinned broadly and said, "I miscalculated," twisting the hideous scarring of his eye and stretching the ancient scar on his chin. "I didn't expect you to act in this way, Uchiha Mikoto." Mikoto remained silent, but based on Danzu's amused smile, Kakashi deduced that her face spoke for itself. "Very well," said he. In a thin, high-pitched shriek, Danzo said, "I think I've come to a decision. I appreciate the thought you put into this. After all, you brought me Sharingan no Kakashi and yourself. 3 more eyes." With the knife in hand, the sharp edge aimed directly at Fugaku's jugular. Mikoto's arm suddenly whipped out like quicksilver, exposing razor sharp shuriken as the Uchiha combs in her hair fell apart. Kakashi could follow the spinning blades with Obito's eye. In beautiful slow motion, they whirled in the air like languid snowflakes, past, present, and almost future intertwined in a single shot, bound for Danzo. Kakashi parted his lips to take a breath. Obito's gaze followed the shuriken, anticipating the unexpected, moist plunge into Danzu's throat's exposed flesh. He felt air rush into his empty lungs. In the almost future, an arc of blood rose from Fugaku's slashed throat, his lifeblood leaking pointlessly from him. To restart the cycle, exhale, letting the air rush outward. As Danzo lit the bomb and cursed the Uchiha with his last breath in the near present, there was a flash of blue chakra. The Mangekyo's basic design was almost elegant, and it was very easy to use. Kakashi only needed to relive the 2 worst days of his life to activate it. Obito's face half smiled up at him, blood dripping from the edges where boy turned to boulder and rock met skin. every little detail beautifully captured by the Sharingan for all eternity. With his fist buried in her chest and his other arm wrapped around her shoulders in the only embrace he had ever given her in her brief life, he held Rin's heart in his palm, still beating, and the tiny O of surprise her mouth made as he breathed in her sweet, sweet scent. Obito's eyes started to well up with unsightly bloody tears. Before merging into a single flawless pinwheel, the Tomo started out spinning slowly before gaining speed. Kakashi blinked. An empty emptiness engulfed Danzu's hand as it vanished from the wrist, his fingers clenched tightly around the handle of the tagged kunai. He started to gaze down at the bleeding stump of his wrist, which was perfectly level and appeared to have been cut by an invisible sword. His single eye widened slightly. The Sharingan read the lines of the future and recalled everything that had happened. Kakashi had the ability to alter the future with each blink of Obito's eye. Danzo uttered the words, "I," before Makoto's spinning shuriken struck him in the throat with a dull thunk. The last time he breathed, he gasped, his blood bubbling up in gushing foam. Without much fanfare, Danzu's lifeless body slowly sagged to the ground, his blood soaking Fugaku's restrained body as his heart pumped in vain for the few seconds that remained. Makoto stood before him motionless as a statue, and Kakashi glanced up at him. A single drop of blood mimicked a tear as it streaked down a pale cheek. Her words were, "It's over," so it was. With a tiny spark of lightning, Kakashi easily sliced through the string of red seal tags surrounding the Uchiha police headquarters, sending the charred papers fluttering pointlessly to the ground. Around him, ninja moved in a deliberate, rhythmic rhythm, carrying messages, supplies, and hostages who were being gradually freed from the still, dangerous building. Putting one foot in front of the other, he moved forward because it was the only thing he knew how to do, and he stepped over the blackened mark that was deeply burned into the ground, the only remnant of the broken four violet flames barrier. As he passed the medical tents set up in front of the library, he saw the Anbu agent standing guard in the shadows of the telephone pole, one hand steady on the ninjutsu's hilt resting on her hip, the Chunin message runners stretching in front of a dumpling shop, and the medics hurrying in and out. After walking and walking until he finally reached a red tent with the Hokage's seal on it, Kakashi found the eye of calm amid the flurry of activity surrounding it. By the doorway, two Anbu guards came to life, vanishing into the thin space between breaths. One of them, wearing a black cloak that rippled over scarred shoulders, said, "Hitaki Kakashi, the Hokage is expecting you." Kakashi melted into emptiness after passing through the tent's flaps with a foreign chakra that hooked deeply into his skin. His chakra senses stretched out towards the two bright signatures, which flared into life as he slipped through the wards. It took a moment for his eye to adjust to the dim lighting inside the tent. Kakashi noticed the individual strands in a halo of yellow hair floating in the breeze from the open tent flap, the faint hint of artificially scented banana shampoo through his mask, and the freshly dried tear tracks cutting through dusty cheeks as time slowed down like a rubber band. Kakashi.ni.san. Kakashi felt time suddenly return to normal as Naruto slammed into his shins. When he finally stopped, a small boy who was crying stopped him, and he fell to his knees. Naruto sobbed, "You came back, you really came back," his tears instantly soaking through Kakashi's bloodied Chunin blues and leaving his whiskered cheeks smeared with rusty brown. "You're so late, you said it was only going to be for a little while and it was forever and ever and ever and I thought you weren't never ever gonna come back." Inhaling the scent of sweat and fake bananas, as well as pure, unadulterated joy, Kakashi buried his masked nose in Naruto's hair. He shut his eye. Finally, Kakashi said, "Hi Naruto," in a raspy voice. "I'm sorry I'm late. I got a little lost on my way back here." Using the zippers and vest pockets as handholds, Naruto wriggled his way into Kakashi's chest and pulled himself up until they were face to face. He looked straight into Kakashi's blue eyes. Kakashi's heart froze when Naruto demanded, "You kill all the bad guys?" Because those were Minato's eyes, Kushina's razor, sharp mouth, and Naruto's unique resolve. Kakashi replied, "Yes," recalling the noise made by Gari's head hitting the floor, the rattling rasp of Danzu's last breath, and the weight of Rin's still beating heart in his fist. Regardless of his past, present, or future, he would carry these with him for the rest of his life. They're all dead now. With his rich crimson robes that blended in with the tent's fabric, he attracted the Sandame's attention over Naruto's shoulder. At night, the power banked like a coal fire, and the Hokage's chakra signature lay surprisingly dormant. The Sandame bowed his head slightly, his eyes darkened by the hat's brim. Kakashi dabbed at a tear that was streaming down Naruto's cheek and said, "I'm finished. I've served the Hokage as I've sworn. And I'm not going anywhere else for a long, long time, I promise." The air still had a hint of the night's rain and the damp earth, and the morning was lovely, softly blue like a robin's egg. As hundreds of villagers poured across the green in front of the memorial stone like liquid pools of solemn, shifting black, Uchiha Shisui and Shiranui Genma were buried with full honors. The fangs of the Inuzuka, the waves of the Nara, and the curling symbol of the Hyuga clan were all brushed against by Uchiha fans. They were all bound by the spiral leaf of Konohagakure, the village hidden in the leaves. With a chilly, numb disinterest, Itachi watched all of this beneath his long lashes, and a single, empty thought ran through his mind. This is what he died for. The air rippled with intent as the Hokage lifted his hands in the air. The crowd froze. We have gathered here today to honor the sacrifice of our greatest shinobi. That's a little rude, isn't it? Watching from the shadows and not even bothering to grace your cousin's funeral with your real presence. A freshly sharpened kunai struck the tree he was leaning on with a dull thunk, removing a few stray wisps of Itachi's bangs, causing him to tense slightly. Itachi said, "Aunt Kyoko," in a voice so low that it was almost impossible to tell it apart from the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. His aunt gave him a broad smile that was both too similar to Shisui's and insufficient. The wind caused her curls to whip wildly, creating a fluttering halo around her pale face. She jerked her hand over to the sea of black, where a reflection of him stood stolidly next to his parents, indistinguishable in the crowd of mourners. "That's a very good shadow clone you have there standing next to your father. Did you mix some genjutsu in there? Give it your actual clothes so it would smell like you too?" Itachi remained silent. The broad smile broke into something sharp and splintered, a huge opening that Itachi was afraid to look through. She said quietly, "You know, he really did love you, and it hurt more than any physical injury or if she had simply cursed him and condemned him to hell." Itachi winced as he dug his fingers into the tree to find something to buy. "He loved us all so much more than we deserved." Kyoko looked away from the memorial service and the assembled villagers, toward the horizon. "Makoto told me about your group." Itachi gave a blink. Kyoko looked back in his direction. "Your little rebellion. When was the last time you met?" Itachi cleared his throat, the words tearing at his throat. Before Shisui left." Kyoko gave a sharp nod. "I don't care about this stupid clan. I don't care what the elders want, ambition, wealth, power. What does it mean to the mothers who lose their sons and daughters to endless wars? Honor and duty are cold comfort when we have sacrificed our flesh and blood." Her chakra, a distorted, refracted echo of Shisui's signature, was burning as bright as the sun as she stalked toward him. "For the rest of your life, carry your regret with you," she said icily. With her eyes twin coals piercing his heart, she leaned into him and said, "Remember your part in his death. And if you ever loved him, you will do your duty and honor his death by fixing this clan, heir." The clean black Itachi's mourning garments were splattered with dust and chipped bark as Kyoko pulled the kunai out of the tree trunk with ease. Her calluses pressed against his as she carefully placed the blade in his hand and then twisted his fingers around the rusty handle. She said, "I'll be watching," and disappeared in the brief interval between heartbeats. Here, they lacked bells. For the last 3 days, 20.2 had awoken to the unusual silence. A strange woman would occasionally greet him with a kind smile and poke him in the back and chest with cold metal objects when he woke up. At other times, the small table beside him held a meal tray that contained strange items like soup with an egg floating in it and grilled fish. 20.2 always ate rapidly, watching the door to make sure nobody entered to remove the tray too soon. In case he needed them, he kept emergency crackers under his bed and some of the juice boxes they gave him in his socks. The strange woman knocked on the door today and entered after a brief pause. This time, she was holding a clipboard, and her mouth was stretched wide, revealing all of her teeth in a huge, exaggerated smile. "Hello," she said. "How are you?" 20.2 counted the teeth in her mouth while silently observing her. "Well, as usual," she stumbled a bit over his designated number. 22. "I have some good news. It's finally safe for you to go out and it looks like physically, you're all okay." 20.2 counted to 10 teeth, but they couldn't remember what happened after that. 108 teeth. "Do you know what that means?" 20.2 gave a headshake. She said, "It means you can join the other children in the playroom," in a cheerful, high-pitched voice. "And you can finally begin your sessions with Yamanaka Sensei, who will help you sort out how you feel on the inside. How does that sound?" 20.2's heart congealed into a tight ball. "Where's 16? The odd woman parted her lips into a "oh" and blinked. She glanced down at the clipboard she was holding and asked, 16? 16, let me see ya." "He's my brother," added 20.2 gravely. "He has white hair." The woman said, "Oh," with her hand over her mouth. "Well, if that's your brother 16, I think I might know where he is. Do you want to come with me and look for him?" 20.2 gazed at her other hand for a considerable amount of time. Her hands were calloused, but they were all the wrong kind. He didn't notice any dried blood in her fingernails or the ones that resulted from holding a blade for an extended period of time. He said, "Okay," and grasped her hand. 20.2 left the room to find his brother for the first time since he had woken up in this weird new world. 20.2 could vaguely sense a chakra embedded in the walls as they slipped into a large, white, windowless hallway. Every time he touched it, his hand tingled. 20.2 didn't have to run because the strange woman walked slowly, allowing him to take his time and examine various areas of the wall that felt even more tingly to the touch. The woman said, "So you can feel the seals, huh?" 20.2, who had no idea what seals were, nodded. She stopped in front of another door after they had made 2 left turns and a right turn down the hallway. In front of it this time was a tall, odd man holding a book that was bright orange. His white hair was as long as a 16-year-old's, but it stood straight up in the air. "Hitaki." "Dono," said the odd woman. "I've brought one of the children well enough to play. We're looking for his brother, actually. He's got white hair, like yours." 20.2 could see the marks of at least 6 different knives concealed against the line of his long arms and legs as the tall man looked down at them. "Perhaps more." The man said, "Well," with a mask and a tilted forehead protector covering the majority of his face. He formed an upside down U with his single visible eye. "Look who we have here. What's your name?" There were too many knives and teeth for 20.2 to count. His words were, "Don't have one." The air grew slightly heavier, but the man remained silent. "You know," he finally said nonchalantly. "That's something you can change. Maybe you can pick your own name out when you feel ready." 20.2 squinted up at him and asked, "Pick a name? That doesn't make sense." The tall man said, "Neither does have a number assigned instead," and 20.2 were at a loss for words. "Just think on it a little. Maybe you can name yourself after something you like." 20.2 scowled as he replayed the tall, odd man's words. "At any rate, go on in. I've seen his brother play with my ward in there." The woman said, "Thank you," and as she pressed her hand against the door, it flared a bright blue. It swung open to reveal a large, open, bright room with blocks and blankets of various colors, as well as other children gathered around a television, in color. 20.2 watched in wonder. All of the children looked around as the door slammed behind them, but 20.2 of them ignored it. 20.2 exclaimed, "It's Super Sentai Samurai Warriors, it's real." One of the children pressed his hand against his bandaged head and leapt to his feet, stumbling only slightly. "I told you so," exclaimed Uchiha Sasuke. "Now you believe me. Are you gonna come watch it or not?" Uchiha Sasuke was elbowed by 16 as he hissed, "Shush, hurry up and get over here 22. You're missing the best part." One of the other children said, "Hey, hey," and 20.2 of them failed to recognize him. He had amusing facial lines and bright yellow hair. "What's going on? Who's this guy?" "He's one of Sasuke's friends that Kakashi.ni.san and Itachi.ni.san saved, obviously," remarked another child in a mocking tone. Her pink hair and appearance were also unfamiliar to 20.2. Because of their bright hair, they resembled the younger Super Sentai Samurai Warriors. Impatiently, she said, "Come and sit down, otherwise Sasuke is going to fall over again and then we all have to stop watching." Sasuke pouted, "I am not," but he sat down again, slightly unsteady, beside Naruto and 16. 16 grinned and said, "Come on, little brother," while 20.2 approached to sit beside his brother, Uchiha Sasuke, and the boy with the bright yellow hair. The odd boy poked his finger into 20.2's ribs and called out, "Hey, hey," loudly. "If you're Sasuke's friend then you can be my friend too." He extended his hand. "I'm Uzumaki Naruto, friends?" 20.2 took Naruto's hand, which was as soft as a baby's, as if he had never held a knife before. He said, "Okay," and shook it. "Friends." Naruto pumped his fist and smiled at him. "Yeah, I've got a new friend." "Shish." Simultaneously shushed the 16-year-old Sasuke and the pink-haired girl. "Quiet." Naruto yelled, "They can be your friends too," while ignoring them. "You ever play exploding node tag?" 20.2 gave a headshake. Naruto smiled, his mouth opening wide enough to reveal sharp, pointy teeth resembling those of an animal. "Oh man, we're gonna have so much fun." Tenzo entered through one of the secret Anbu passageways, swerved around the traps, keyed past the wards, and finally stopped in front of the window leading to the Hokage's office. After making one chakra flare, he waited courteously on the windowsill for the Hokage's personal guard to return the flare, signaling that he was allowed inside. Tenzo held his breath. Then another. Tenzo flinched as the window suddenly cracked open, almost teetering off the edge and falling 10 stories. With a small amount of chakra and a great deal of appreciation for the Anbu mask that concealed his flaming cheeks, he steadied himself. The Sandame said, "Hello, cat," with a hint of humor, "come on in." Ignoring the Anbu guards that hid in his shadow for protection, the Hokage took a step back and used a lil chakra. Infused strength to turn the window all the way open. Tenzo entered the office with care, being cautious not to tread on the Hokage's robe hem. With a loud scream, the Hokage closed the window behind Tenzo and stood with his arms crossed, gazing down at the village spread out below. The sun's pinkish rays were leaking into the blue-black of the fading night, and it was just past dawn. The village was gradually awakening as the shinobi were illuminated by the day. Curls of smoke rose from waking households, and flickers of traveling shinobi skimming over the rooftops glinted in the rising light. "Why are you here?" Tenzo lowered his masked face to the ground and sank into a submissive crouch. Tenzo reiterated the Anbu oath he took just over a year ago when he said, "I've sworn to protect and obey. Your word is my command, Hokage, Sama." And he froze. Tenzo dared to look up at his Hokage's face, which was craggy and lined with the weight of 2 wars and a lifetime of leadership, after feeling a gentle touch on his shoulder. The Sandame said, "More than your oath drives you," with unreadable dark eyes. "I don't mean to diminish the honor of your service. But I wish to understand what else drives you to me, to this particular mission." Tenzo exhaled slowly, the ninjutsu nestled into the bend of his spine like steel against bone, the weight of his mask suddenly pressing down on his face. Tenzo stated, "Kakashi." Senpei made his choice, carefully considering each word. He is staying behind, to protect what lies behind these walls. The Sandame tightened his hold on Tenzo's shoulder, just inches from the bicep tattoo. "I have made my own choice," Tenzo stated calmly. "I am leaving, to protect what is here. How can I serve, Hokage? Sama?" After closing his eyes, the Sandame's hand briefly flared hot with chakra before he withdrew it. Jiraiya is in rain right now, tracking the roots of Danzu's ties in the area. He's sighted Orochimaru in the area. The floorboards beneath Tenzo creaked with strained potential, and his veins flooded with ice. Your first mission will be to investigate Danzu's ties to Hanzo and potentially Orochimaru's in regards to the political regime that Hanzo has established. Are you ready for this? Yes, Tenzo replied with a smile.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.